The biting wind whipped around Officer Jake Riley, a seasoned veteran of the canine unit. As he navigated his patrol vehicle through the hushed, snow-laden streets of Oakhaven, the town, usually a bustling hub of activity, was transformed into a quiet, almost ethereal landscape under the relentless grip of winter. Snow, thick and pristine, lay like a freshly laundered sheet over every surface, muffling the usual sounds of civilization and lending an eerie stillness to the night. It was nearing midnight, and the world outside the warmth of his patrol car was a canvas of deep blues and purples, punctuated by the stark white of the untouched snow. Beside him, in the specially designed back compartment, lay Blitz, his loyal German Shepherd partner. Blitz wasn't just a dog, he was Jake's shadow, his confidant, his extended senses in the often unpredictable world of law enforcement. Their bond was forged not just in training exercises and countless patrols, but in moments of shared danger and quiet understanding that transcended words. Jake often joked that Blitz understood him better than most humans ever could, and deep down, he knew it wasn't really a joke. Tonight's patrol was, by all accounts, routine. The scanner murmured softly, relaying sporadic calls of minor traffic incidents or false alarms. The quiet hum of the engine and the rhythmic sweep of the wipers clearing the falling flakes provided a soothing backdrop to Jake's thoughts. He passed by familiar landmarks, the old mill, now a historical site, its dormant water wheel half buried in drifts, the frozen expanse of Willow Creek, shimmering faintly under the streetlights, the skeletal trees of Blackwood Forest, their branches reaching like gnarled fingers into the inky sky. It was a beautiful, albeit stark, beauty, and Jake had grown to appreciate the quiet solitude of these late-night shifts. But tonight, something felt different. It wasn't a tangible thing, not a sound or a sight that he could immediately pinpoint. It was a subtle shift in the air, a whisper of an anomaly that prickled at the back of his neck. He chalked it up to fatigue, perhaps, or the inherent vigilance that came with his job. They were traversing the perimeter of Blackwood Forest, an expansive stretch of ancient woodland that bordered the eastern edge of Oakhaven. It was a sparsely populated area, known more for hiking trails in the summer and hunting in the fall than for any significant human activity in the dead of winter. As they drove slowly along a narrow, unpaved service road that hugged the forest line, Jake glanced at his thermal imaging display. The screen glowed with the familiar greens and yellows, mapping out the heat signatures of the environment. Most of it was a cool blue, the frigid air and snow reflecting minimal heat. Then he saw it. A fleeting flicker of orange, a momentary burst of heat. Off to the right, deep within the tree line. It was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the vast coldness. Huh, Jake muttered, leaning closer to the screen. Must be a deer or a fox, maybe Blitz, who usually rested calmly during these stretches. Suddenly shifted in his compartment. His ears perked up, and a low, almost imperceptible whine escaped his throat. Jake glanced back in the rearview mirror, meeting Blitz's intelligent, dark eyes. The dog was staring intently in the direction where Jake had seen the thermal flicker. Just a critter, buddy. Jake reassured him, though a flicker of unease stirred within him. Blitz wasn't usually so easily disturbed by wildlife. He was a working dog, focused and disciplined. He continued driving, but the image of the fleeting heat signature and Blitz's unusual reaction lingered. Oakhaven wasn't prone to anything dramatic. Most of his calls involved lost tourists or a stubborn raccoon in someone's trash can. Yet, the small, almost imperceptible shift in Blitz's demeanor was enough to plant a seed of doubt. He reached the end of the service road, where it looped back towards the main highway. He could simply turn around, continue his uneventful patrol. His shift was nearly over. The snow was beginning to fall harder now, large, wet flakes descending with a renewed intensity, painting the windshield in a swirling dance of white. Visibility was dropping fast, but something tugged at him. It wasn't a police instinct. Not yet. It was something more primal. A connection to the silent, watchful creature behind him. He looked at Blitz again. The dog was still alert, his nose twitching, a soft, anxious rumble building in his chest. His gaze remained fixed on the dark, snow-dusted expanse of the forest. Jake sighed, a puff of warm air fogging the interior of the car for a moment. "All right, boy," he said, more to himself than to Blitz. "Just a quick look. Can't hurt, right?" He slowly turned the patrol vehicle back down the service road, driving slower this time, scanning the tree line. The thermal display remained stubbornly blue. The snow was coming down so thick now that even a large animal would be obscured quickly, but Blitz's restlessness persisted. He began to paw at the divider, a soft, insistent scratching that spoke volumes. His eyes were wide, pleading, urging Jake deeper into the shadows of the forest. It was an unspoken conversation, a silent plea that Jake, in his years of working with canines, had learned to interpret with absolute certainty. This wasn't just a deer. This was something else, something important. Jake felt a prickle of unease morph into a genuine sense of foreboding. He remembered old stories from the academy, tales of canines leading officers to impossible discoveries, their animal instincts sharper and more attuned than any humans. He had always been a believer in Blitz's unique abilities, but tonight felt different. There was an urgency in Blitz's eyes that Jake had rarely witnessed. He pulled the car to a stop near where he'd seen the thermal anomaly, though by now, the falling snow had likely covered any tracks. The silence outside was profound, broken only by the gentle hiss of the falling flakes. The forest loomed, dark and impenetrable, a world unto itself. "Okay, pal," Jake said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Let's see what you've got." He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and stepped out into the biting cold. The snow immediately crunched under his boots, a sound that seemed abnormally loud in the overwhelming silence. He opened Blitz's compartment, and the powerful dog bounded out, shaking off the accumulated snow from his fur. Blitz immediately lowered his nose to the ground, sniffing the fresh powder with intense focus, his tail giving a short, anxious wag. He then looked up at Jake, let out a soft bark, and started to pull, not gently, but with a surprising force, towards the deepest part of the woods, away from the faint glow of the distant streetlights. Jake tightened his grip on the leash, feeling the raw power of the canine. This wasn't a casual stroll. This was a mission. And as he followed Blitz, deeper and deeper into the hushed, snow-covered embrace of Blackwood Forest, a shiver, unrelated to the cold, traced its way down his spine. He had no idea what they would find, but a profound certainty settled in his gut. This was no ordinary patrol. Something extraordinary, something that defied logical explanation, lay hidden within the swirling white. And Blitz, his silent, steadfast partner, was determined to find it. The night, which had promised routine, was rapidly descending into an unknown and potentially perilous adventure. The snow continued its relentless descent, transforming the familiar forest into an alien landscape of shifting white shadows. Each step Jake took was a muffled crunch, the only sound accompanying the steady, determined pull of Blitz. The powerful dog was no longer merely agitated, he was a force of nature, his nose to the ground, his body language communicating an undeniable, urgent purpose. He wasn't just tracking, he was hunting, driven by an instinct far deeper than any command Jake could give. Jake tightened his grip on the leash, feeling the strain in his arm. Blitz was leading him away from the service road, away from the faint, reassuring glow of the distant streetlights, deeper into the dense thicket of Blackwood Forest. The trees grew closer here, their snow-laden branches interlocking overhead, creating a dark, hushed tunnel that felt both ancient and unnerving. Moonlight, when it managed to pierce the cloud cover, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the falling flakes, turning familiar shapes into spectral figures. He consulted his GPS, its small screen a beacon of technology in the wild expanse. They were moving steadily east, towards a section of the forest known for its rugged terrain and sparse human presence. It was the kind of place where lost hikers occasionally stumbled upon old logging roads, but rarely ventured willingly in such conditions. A surge of unease, cold and sharp, began to creep into Jake's chest. His rational mind, the mind of a trained officer, screamed for him to turn back. This was foolish. He had no probable cause, no official call-out, just a dog's intuition. But the other part of him, the part that had witnessed Blitz perform near miracles, knew better than to ignore the silent plea from his partner. A sudden, sharp tug on the leash jolted Jake from his thoughts. Blitz had stopped abruptly, his body rigid, head raised, sniffing the air. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest. Not an aggressive growl, but one of deep concern. Almost anguish? His ears twitched, triangulating on a sound Jake couldn't hear over the whipping wind. "What is it?" Boy, Jake whispered, his flashlight beam cutting through the swirling snow. He swept the beam across the trees, searching for any sign, any movement. Nothing. Just the endless white and the dark silhouettes of pines. Blitz whined, a plaintive, almost human sound. Then began to pull again, with renewed urgency. His pace quickened, forcing Jake to jog to keep up, his boots sinking deeper into the fresh powder with each stride. They were moving off the faint, deer-made trail they had been following, heading directly into an untouched section of the woods. Jake's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. He thought of all the possibilities. A lost hiker. Unlikely, given the extreme weather and the remoteness. An injured animal. Possibly, but Blitz's intensity felt different, more human-centric. He had seen Blitz track injured animals before, and while focused. It was never with this level of desperate conviction. This felt like a search and rescue. But rescue for whom? The memory of a specific past incident flashed through Jake's mind. It had been nearly 2 years ago, a sweltering summer day, when a 4-year-old girl, Lily Peterson, had wandered away from a family picnic in the state park bordering Oakhaven. The initial search parties had been fruitless, despair growing with each passing hour. The terrain was dense, the heat oppressive. Jake and Blitz had been called in as a last resort. Blitz had been relentless that day, pulling Jake through thorny thickets and across rocky streams, ignoring his own discomfort. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting long shadows, just as hope was starting to dwindle. Blitz had veered sharply, leading Jake not towards a visible trail, but directly into a dense patch of overgrown brush. There, nestled amongst the ferns, dehydrated but otherwise unharmed, was Lily, miraculously asleep. Her parents' tearful gratitude had been overwhelming, but it was the quiet, knowing look Blitz had given him afterwards. Almost a nod of mutual understanding, that Jake remembered most vividly. It was then that Jake truly understood the depth of his partner's capabilities, the inexplicable connection between human and animal that transcended training manuals and logical deductions. That memory solidified Jake's resolve. If Blitz was this insistent, there was a reason, a damn good reason. He might look foolish, freezing his backside off in the middle of a blizzard, chasing after a thermal flicker and a dog's whim. But he trusted Blitz with his life, and he trusted Blitz's instincts above all else. The forest began to thin slightly as they continued, opening into small, snow-covered clearings, then closing back into dense groves of pines. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the soft thud of snow falling from branches. The air was heavy, the cold seeping into Jake's bones despite his thick patrol jacket. His flashlight beam was now almost useless, swallowed by the swirling white. He relied on the muted glow from the small tactical light mounted on Blitz's harness. A tiny, bobbing beacon in the vast darkness. Suddenly, Blitz let out another, more urgent whine, followed by a series of short, sharp barks. He was no longer just pulling, he was actively dragging Jake forward, his powerful legs churning through the deep snow. Jake stumbled, regaining his footing, his heart pounding in his chest. They were close, he could feel it. The air felt charged, expectant. They pushed through a final curtain of snow-laden branches. And then, they were in a larger clearing. It was a serene, almost magical sight. The snow lay pristine and undisturbed, bathed in the faint, diffused light that seemed to filter through the heavy cloud cover, creating an ethereal glow. Tall pines ringed the perimeter, their branches laden with thick white blankets, but what Jake saw in the center of that clearing made him freeze. His breath caught in his throat, a cloud of white in the frigid air. He blinked, shaking his head, convinced the extreme cold was playing tricks on his eyes. There, etched meticulously into the untouched canvas of the snow, were patterns, not random marks from falling branches or animal tracks. These were deliberate, precise, a series of large, distinct paw prints, clearly from a large dog, were arranged in a staggering, unbelievable pattern. They formed 3 distinct dots, then 3 distinct dashes, then 3 more distinct dots. An unmistakable summons on a message, tapped out in the snow. Jake's flashlight, almost forgotten in his hand, clattered to the ground, its beam now casting a useless circle on the snow. He stared, wide-eyed, his mind struggling to process the impossible sight before him. His jaw went slack. The biting cold, the exhaustion, the rational objections, all of it vanished, replaced by a profound, almost dizzying sense of disbelief. Blitz, no longer pulling, stood beside him, panting softly, his breath misting in the air. He nudged Jake's hand with his wet nose, then looked from Jake to the impossible message in the snow. As if waiting for confirmation that his human partner finally understood, Jake knelt slowly, ignoring the cold seeping through his uniform. He reached out a gloved hand, tracing the outline of one of the paw prints. It was deep, clear, unmistakably from a large canine. But how could dogs, no matter how intelligent, orchestrate something like this? It defied every logical explanation, every piece of K9 training he had ever known. His gaze swept around the clearing. No human footprints nearby, only the fresh, pristine snow, save for the incredible message. Then he saw it, a faint trail of additional paw prints, leading away from the S.O.S and disappearing into the dense tree line on the opposite side of the clearing. They were the same size, the same pattern, more than one dog. Judging by the slight variations in depth, his heart began to pound. Not from exertion, but from a mixture of awe and growing apprehension. This wasn't a trick of light or a figment of his imagination. This was real. And it meant that someone, or something, was in serious trouble, and that the K9s involved possessed an intelligence, a level of communication that transcended anything he had ever witnessed. The wind howled softly through the pines, a mournful sound. The snow continued to fall, threatening to erase the miraculous message. Jake knew he had to act, and fast. The impossible had just happened, right before his eyes. And what Officer Jake Riley discovered, etched in the silent, swirling snow by a desperate, intelligent plea, left him utterly, undeniably stunned. The biting cold of the Oak Haven wilderness faded into insignificance as Jake knelt in the snow. His eyes riveted on the impossible message. His mind, usually a fortress of logic and procedure, reeled an S.O. Three dots, three dashes, three dots, meticulously etched by paws. Not branches, not an accidental pattern, but a deliberate, desperate plea for help. Blitz, sensing Jake's profound shock, nudged his hand again, a soft whine escaping his throat. He looked from Jake to the snow, then towards the faint trail of paw prints leading away from the clearing. His message was clear. We don't have time. Follow? Jake slowly pushed himself to his feet, the cold biting at his knees through his uniform trousers. He retrieved his flashlight, its beam now cutting through the still falling snow, illuminating the stark reality of the scene. The prints were large, consistent, clearly from at least two powerful canines. Similar in size to Blitz, perhaps even larger. He crouched again, examining the individual paw marks that formed the letters. The depth, the slight drag marks, it suggested urgency, a frantic effort. These weren't just random taps, they were made with a deliberate purpose, a clear intent to communicate. How? Blitz, Jake whispered, more to himself than to his partner. How is this even possible? Blitz responded with a low woof, then pulled on the leash. Not with a frantic yank, but with a firm, insistent tug, guiding Jake towards the fresh trail disappearing into the dense tree line. The snow was falling harder now, threatening to cover the prints quickly. Every second counted. Jake knew he was operating outside protocol. He hadn't called for backup. His radio was out of range in this remote section of the forest. He had no official report. Just an extraordinary discovery made by his K9 partner, but the urgency in Blitz's eyes. The sheer impossibility of the S.O.S bomber in the snow. Bypassed all logical channels and screamed for immediate action. This wasn't just a lost animal, this was something far more significant as they moved. Jake's thoughts raced. He pictured the K9s he knew, highly trained, intelligent. Yes, but capable of orchestrating a Morse code message in the snow. It was unheard of. It defied everything he'd been taught in the academy. Every piece of empirical evidence about animal intelligence. Yet, there it was. Irrefutable proof. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a direct, intentional cry for help from animals who were clearly in dire straits and possessed an intelligence beyond common understanding. The trail led them deeper into the forest, away from any semblance of human civilization. The terrain grew rougher, the ground uneven beneath the thick blanket of snow. Jake had to pick his footing carefully, his heavy boots sinking occasionally into drifts. Blitz, however, moved with an almost ethereal grace, his powerful body cutting effortlessly through the powder, his nose unerringly following the invisible scent. The snow, which had been a gentle fall, intensified. It began to swirl around them, a dizzying vortex of white. The wind picked up, howling through the branches, creating an eerie, mournful symphony. Jake pulled his collar higher, the cold seeping through his heavy coat. He checked his watch. Nearly an hour had passed since he'd first spotted the thermal anomaly. The world outside this small, snow-choked tunnel of trees felt a million miles away. Suddenly, Blitz stopped again, his body tensing. He let out a low growl, a more protective sound this time, his fur bristling slightly along his spine. His head was raised, sniffing the air. Then he turned his head sharply to the left, towards a cluster of particularly dense pine trees. Jake raised his flashlight, its beam cutting through the swirling snow, revealing nothing but the endless white. "What is it?" "Boy," he whispered, his hand instinctively going to the holster at his hip. The air seemed to crackle with an unseen tension. Then, a faint sound, carried on the wind, reached his ears. A low, almost imperceptible whimpering. It was faint, barely audible above the howling wind and the falling snow. But it was there, and it wasn't the sound of an animal. It was human. A wave of adrenaline surged through Jake. He exchanged a quick, knowing look with Blitz. The dog's ears were flattened, his body coiled. Ready. This was it. This was what the moment was all about. Blitz pulled forward again, but more cautiously this time, leading Jake around the dense pines. The whimpering grew slightly louder, accompanied by the muffled sounds of shifting. And then, a series of soft, anxious whines. Dog whines. They broke through the last line of trees and found themselves on the edge of a small, hidden depression in the landscape. It wasn't a natural cave or a large rock formation. It was a makeshift shelter, clearly constructed from fallen branches, tarpaulins, and scavenged debris. Now almost entirely buried under a fresh mound of snow, a thin wisp of smoke, barely visible, curled from a crude vent at the top, suggesting a small fire within. Blitz's growl deepened, a low, rumbling warning. He shifted his weight, putting himself slightly in front of Jake, his protective instincts on full alert from within the snow-covered shelter. The whimpering intensified, and the dog whines grew more distressed. Jake approached slowly, his hand now firmly on the grip of his service weapon. Though still holstered, he scanned the immediate surroundings, his eyes piercing the gloom, searching for any sign of a threat. The wind was so strong here, whipping the snow into blinding eddies, that even recent footprints would be erased almost instantly. "Police state your presence," Jake called out, his voice a gravelly rumble against the howling wind. He aimed his flashlight at the entrance of the makeshift shelter, a small flap of tattered canvas. The whimpering inside suddenly stopped. The dog whines ceased. A tense silence descended, broken only by the relentless storm. Jake waited, his heart thudding against his ribs. He counted to 10, then 15. No response. "I'm an officer with the Oak Haven Canine Unit." Jake tried again, his voice a little softer, more reassuring. "My dog, Blitz, led me here. We saw your message. Are you injured? Do you need help?" Silence. The only sound was Blitz's low, steady breathing beside him. Jake glanced at Blitz. The dog looked up at him, then nudged the canvas flap with his nose. A clear invitation. There was no aggression in Blitz's stance now, only a quiet determination. He seemed to know, instinctively, that whoever was inside wasn't a threat to them, but was in immense peril. Taking a deep breath, Jake made a decision. He holstered his weapon. This wasn't a tactical raid, this was a rescue. He slowly reached out, pushing aside the snow-laden canvas flap. A rush of warm, stale air mingled with the faint scent of wood smoke and wet dog greeted him. The interior was small, cramped, and dim, lit by the flickering glow of a crude makeshift lantern, a jar with a wick dipped in some kind of oil. And then Jake saw them, clustered in the far corner, huddled together for warmth. Were 4 dogs. 2 of them were large, powerful German shepherds. Their coats a mix of black and tan, almost identical in build and coloring to Blitz. They were clearly the ones responsible for the S.O.S message. Their eyes wide and intelligent, watching him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Beside them were 2 smaller, scruffier dogs, their breeds indistinguishable in the dim light, shivering uncontrollably, and nestled amongst them. Her back pressed against the rough wall of the shelter was a young woman. Her face was pale, smudged with dirt, and tear-streaked. Her hair, once probably a vibrant blonde, was matted and tangled. Her clothes were torn and thin, offering little protection against the frigid elements. And she shivered violently. her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her eyes, wide with a profound terror, were fixed on Jake. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, and a gag, crudely fashioned from a piece of cloth, was tied tightly around her mouth. She was struggling to breathe, her chest heaving. The German shepherds immediately reacted, their low growls intensifying, their bodies shifting protectively in front of the woman. They bared their teeth, a clear warning. "Whoa, whoa, easy there," Jake said. Holding up his hands in a gesture of peace, he took a cautious step inside, the sudden presence of 5 large dogs in a confined space making him wary. Despite Blitz's calming presence beside him, Blitz, however, immediately stepped forward, ignoring the protective growls of the other German shepherds. He approached them slowly, his tail giving a short, appeasing wag. He lowered his head, sniffing the other dogs, then let out a soft whine, a sound of recognition, of shared understanding. It was a silent conversation, a profound acknowledgement of their shared plight and purpose. The growls of the 2 S.O.S. dogs softened. Their rigid bodies relaxed fractionally. They seemed to understand Blitz's intention, sensing the alliance. One of the large German shepherds, a female with particularly intelligent eyes, nudged the bound woman with her nose, then looked at Jake. A clear plea in her gaze. Jake's eyes met the woman's. Hers were filled with a desperate, overwhelming fear, but beneath it, a glimmer of profound relief. He understood now. The whimpering, the bound wrists, the gag. This wasn't a lost hiker. This was a victim, a hostage. And these incredible, loyal dogs had tapped out an S.O.S. message in the snow to save her. What Officer Jake Riley discovered in that hidden, snow-covered shelter left him not just stunned, but filled with a cold fury. This wasn't just a rescue, it was the unfolding of a dark, sinister plot. A profound injustice revealed by the extraordinary intelligence and unwavering loyalty of a group of canines. The true, harrowing story was only just beginning. The cramped, snow-choked shelter was barely large enough to stand in, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and the musky warmth of several dogs. Jake's initial shock quickly gave way to a surge of professional urgency. He ignored the protective growls of the 2 large German shepherds now standing guard over the terrified woman. Blitz, moving with an almost human understanding, stepped between them and Jake, offering a silent assurance to both sides. He let out a low, calming whine, a sound that seemed to bridge the gap between species. The woman, her eyes still wide with fear, watched Jake intently, her chest heaving against the crude gag. Her desperate, muffled pleas were palpable. Jake's gaze swept over her once more, noting the raw chafing around her wrists where the rope bit into her skin, the unnatural stillness of her posture, the vacant stare in her eyes that spoke of prolonged terror. This wasn't a simple abduction. This was something more sinister, a violation that went beyond mere physical restraint. "It's okay," Jake murmured, his voice low and soothing, aiming his words at both the woman and the 2 vigilant German shepherds. "I'm here to help. My name is Officer Riley. This is Blitz. We're on your side." He knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. The female German shepherd, the one with the particularly intelligent eyes, lowered her head slightly, nudging the woman's shoulder, then looked at Jake, her gaze clear, almost imploring. It was a silent command. Help her. Now, he reached for the gag first, his fingers gentle as he untied the rough knot. The fabric, once removed, revealed lips cracked and dry, and a pale face that looked as though it hadn't seen sunlight in days. A hoarse gasp escaped her lips as she finally took a deep, shuddering breath. Thank you," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. raw with disuse. Tears welled in her eyes, tracking paths through the grime on her cheeks. Oh, thank you. Don't talk yet, Jake advised gently. Save your strength. Let's get these ropes off. He worked quickly, untying the knots binding her wrists. Her hands, when freed, were red and swollen, covered in angry red welts. She rubbed them gingerly, wincing with pain. But the relief in her eyes was profound. The two large German shepherds, no longer growling, watched him with an intensity that suggested they understood every move. One of them, a male with a scar over his left eye, nudged the woman's hand with his nose, then licked it softly. An act of pure devotion. My dogs, she whispered, her gaze sweeping over them with profound love. They saved me. Jake nodded, a lump forming in his throat. They did, he confirmed, looking at the large S.O.S dogs. They tapped an S.O.S in the snow. I still can't believe it. A weak, tremulous smile touched her lips. They're special, all of them are. She struggled to sit up straighter, leaning against the dog with the scar. My name is Ilara Vance. Ilara Vance. The name sparked a faint recognition in Jake's mind. He had heard it before, perhaps in a police briefing or a niche article. Wasn't she a renowned dog breeder, a canine trainer, specializing in highly intelligent working dogs? The pieces began to click into place, adding another layer to the already unbelievable puzzle. This wasn't just a random victim. She was someone whose expertise with canines might explain the impossible message, as Ilara slowly regained some composure. Jake's mind involuntarily drifted back to another impossible rescue. A case that had cemented his absolute faith in Blitz's extraordinary abilities. Even when logic seemed to abandon him, it was over 5 years ago. During his early years in the K-9 unit, a particularly brutal winter storm had swept through the region, leaving behind a blanket of ice and snow and claiming a small, aging Cessna aircraft that had gone down somewhere in the sprawling national forest to the north of Oakhaven. The pilot, a young man on his first solo flight, was presumed lost. Search efforts had been hampered by whiteout conditions and treacherous terrain. Jake, then a younger, more idealistic officer, had been dispatched with Blitz, who was still relatively new to the force. Days turned into nights, the temperature dropping far below zero. Other K-9 teams had searched, finding nothing. The official consensus was grim, no survivors. But Blitz, even after hours of searching, had refused to give up. He pulled, he whined, he barked, leading Jake further and further off the established grid, into a remote section of jagged peaks and deep ravines. Jake, weary and disheartened, had been ready to call it quits, to admit defeat. The sheer impossibility of finding a small plane, let alone a survivor, in that vast, frozen wilderness, was crushing. Then, Blitz had stopped. He had pawed frantically at a seemingly impenetrable wall of snow and ice, whimpering with a desperate urgency. Jake, skeptical but trusting his partner's unwavering conviction, had begun to dig, using a small shovel from his emergency kit. He dug for what felt like hours, the ice like concrete, his muscles screaming, just as he was about to collapse from exhaustion. He hit something metallic. It was a piece of the plane's fuselage, almost entirely buried. They dug further, and there, miraculously, tucked into a small insulated cavity within the wreckage, was the pilot hypothermic, frostbitten, but alive. He had survived thanks to a small emergency blanket and the incredible chance of landing in a way that created a temporary pocket of air and shelter. But he would have died, no doubt, if Blitz hadn't led Jake to that exact, improbable spot. That day had etched an indelible lesson into Jake's soul sometimes. The impossible was merely a failure of human perception, a limitation of logic that a canine's instincts could effortlessly overcome. Blitz had proven then, and was proving again now with this S.O.S, that there were levels of animal intelligence, of intuition, that humans were only beginning to comprehend. It was why he never doubted Blitz, no matter how outlandish the situation seemed, and it was why, even when faced with an S.O. had tapped in the snow, he moved not with disbelief, but with a profound, quiet certainty. Alara, Jake said, bringing himself back to the present. We need to get you out of here. And your dogs. He glanced at the other two smaller dogs, shivering violently, huddled near Alara. They were clearly terrified, but the presence of the larger German shepherds seemed to give them a fragile sense of security. Alara nodded, her eyes darting nervously towards the entrance flap, as if expecting her captors to burst in at any moment. They'll be back, she whispered, her voice still hoarse. Soon. He said he would return for them. And for me. Who is he? Jake asked, his voice hardening. The professional cop was fully engaged now, the awe replaced by a focused determination to bring justice. Alara swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the flickering lantern. Volkov. Viktor Volkov. The name hit Jake with the force of a physical blow. Viktor Volkov. Notorious, elusive, a ghost in the criminal underworld, rumored to be involved in everything from illegal arms dealing to human trafficking, but his most recent alleged enterprise, one that Jake had only seen in cryptic intelligence reports, was underground dog-fighting rings and the illicit breeding and smuggling of highly valuable, specialized working dogs. He was known for his ruthless cruelty, his ability to operate in the shadows, and his chilling efficiency in silencing anyone who crossed him. Volkov, Jake repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Are you sure? Alara nodded grimly. He wants my canines. Their bloodlines? Their training? He wants them for his operations. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd make them fight each other. Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her face again. He knows what they mean to me. Jake felt a cold rage bubbling in his chest. The thought of these magnificent, intelligent animals, capable of such a profound act of communication and loyalty, being forced into brutal, barbaric fights, was sickening. And to think of this woman, clearly gentle and devoted to her animals, being subjected to such terror? How long have you been here? Alara, Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 3 days, she whispered, clutching her knees. They snatched me from my kennel. I was on a remote property. He knew I was alone. They kept me here, forced me to watch what they did to other dogs, to break me, to make me give in. But my dogs, my Max and Luna. She gestured to the two S.O.S. German shepherds. They wouldn't let him. They protected me, and they tapped out the message when they heard your patrol car nearby. Jake's gaze locked with Max and Luna's. Their intelligent eyes seemed to confirm every word, reflecting the harrowing ordeal they had endured. Their loyalty, their sheer brilliance, was staggering. It solidified the fact that he wasn't just rescuing a woman. He was bringing justice to an incredible group of beings who had risked everything to save their human. We need to go, Jake stated, his voice firm, cutting through the heavy air. Now, before he gets back. Can you walk? Alara tried to push herself up, wincing. I think so. My legs are stiff. They haven't let me move much. The urgency was paramount. Volkov? The name alone struck fear into the hearts of hardened officers. If he returned, Jake, with only Blitz and a half-starved victim, would be severely outmatched. They had to move. They had to escape this hidden prison, carved by cruelty in the heart of the snow-laden forest. before the mastermind behind this darkness returned to claim his terrifying prize. The race against time had just begun. The biting wind howled through the skeletal trees, a mournful dirge accompanying their desperate escape. Alara, leaning heavily on Jake, stumbled through the deep snow, her body, weakened by days of captivity and starvation, protested with every strained movement. Yet, her spirit, fueled by the presence of her loyal canines and the unexpected arrival of a rescuer, remained unbroken. Max and Luna, her two German shepherds, flanked her, their powerful bodies acting as living shields against the relentless blizzard, their eyes constantly scanning the swirling white for any sign of danger. The two smaller, scruffier dogs, still trembling, stayed close to Alara's heels, finding solace in the protective presence of the larger canines. "Can you make it, Alara?" Jake asked, his voice raw against the wind. He could feel her shivering violently, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. Hypothermia was a very real threat. I have to," she gasped, her breath misting in the frigid air. "For them. For my dogs." She looked at Max and Luna, a fierce determination flickering in her exhausted eyes. Jake knew they were gambling with precious minutes. Volkov, a man of chilling efficiency, would likely return sooner rather than later. The thought of being caught by his syndicate in this remote, unforgiving wilderness sent a cold dread through Jake's veins. His radio signal was still non-existent. They were on their own. He consulted his internal compass, trying to orient himself. The fastest way back to his patrol vehicle was likely a straight line, but the terrain was too treacherous, filled with unseen dips and rocky outcrops hidden beneath the snow. They needed to follow the path of least resistance. However circuitous it might be, we'll follow their tracks, Jake decided, nodding towards the faint trail of paw prints leading away from the now abandoned makeshift shelter. "Max and Luna, your prints led me here. Can you lead us back, or to a safer path?" Max, the male German shepherd with the scarred eye, looked at Jake, then at Alara, then nudged her hand. He then trotted a few paces ahead, sniffed the snow, and looked back expectantly, as if to say, "Follow me." Luna mirrored his actions, taking up position on Alara's other side. Their intelligence, even in this dire situation, continued to astound Jake. Blitz, ever the diligent partner, fell into position behind them, his nose to the ground, sniffing out any lingering scents, acting as their rear guard. The formation was organic, a silent testament to the natural synergy between these extraordinary animals. The journey was arduous. The snow, relentlessly falling, grew deeper with every step. The wind whipped icy flakes into their faces, blurring visibility to mere feet. Jake relied on the almost imperceptible trail Max and Luna were creating, their powerful legs breaking through the crust of the snow, creating a slightly easier path for Alara to follow. He noticed that Max and Luna would occasionally stop, waiting for Alara to catch up, then would gently nudge her forward, or stand protectively between her and particularly strong gusts of wind. Alara's breathing grew ragged. Her initial surge of adrenaline was fading, replaced by profound exhaustion. Each step was an effort, her legs often buckling. Jake, despite his own fatigue, found a renewed strength, offering her a steady arm, pulling her through drifts, his concern for her safety overriding everything else. He knew they couldn't stop. To rest was to risk freezing, to risk Volkov finding them. As they pressed on, the silence of the blizzard was punctuated only by their labored breathing and the rhythmic crunch of their boots in the snow. Jake's mind, despite the urgency of their situation, began to wander to the implications of what he had witnessed. An S.O.S. in the snow. It was a story that would shake the canine community, maybe even the world. It spoke of a profound, hitherto underestimated, level of cognitive ability in dogs, It meant that these animals weren't just highly trained companions, they were sentient beings capable of abstract thought, of strategic communication. He thought of the hundreds of search and rescue operations that relied on K9s, of the countless lives saved by their unparalleled sense of smell and their unwavering loyalty. But this was different. This was active. Intelligent communication in a human-coded language. It was a game changer, and it made the barbarity of Volkov's operations even more repugnant. To exploit such magnificent creatures for cruel, illicit blood sport was a crime beyond measure. They had been walking for what felt like an eternity when Max suddenly stopped, his head snapping up. A low growl rumbled in his chest. A different kind of growl this time. One of warning, of immediate threat. Luna immediately adopted a defensive stance beside him. Facing the direction they had come from, Jake's heart leaped into his throat. He pulled Alara behind him, his hand instantly on his holstered weapon. Blitz moved to his side, equally alert, his own growl joining Max's. "What is it?" Jake whispered, straining his ears over the wind. Alara, her eyes wide with renewed terror, whispered, "They're here! They followed us!" Through the swirling snow. Jake saw them. Two hulking figures, indistinct at first, then resolving into burly men, their faces obscured by ski masks, their heavy boots crunching through the snow. They were carrying what looked like long, dark objects, rifles. Jake's blood ran cold. He was outgunned, outmaneuvered. He had no backup. It was just him, a barely conscious victim, and four loyal but untrained for combat civilian K9s. Facing armed thugs. "Get down, Ilara!" Jake yelled, pushing her forcefully behind a large, snow-covered fallen log. The two smaller dogs immediately curled up beside her, whimpering. "Go!" Max, Luna, Blitz. "Get out of here!" Ilara screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. She knew the danger these men posed to her beloved dogs, but the K9s didn't budge. Max and Luna stood their ground, their growls intensifying, their eyes fixed on the approaching figures. Blitz, loyal to his partner, stood shoulder to shoulder with Jake, a low, menacing rumble emanating from his chest. They were not running. They were protecting. "Freeze police!" Jake shouted, drawing his sidearm. The cold steel feeling strangely small and insignificant in his gloved hand. He knew it was a desperate gamble, but he had to buy them time. The two men hesitated for a split second, surprised by the sudden confrontation. Then, one of them, a massive figure, raised his rifle. "Don't move!" "Cop!" a gruff voice yelled, muffled by the ski mask. "Just hand over the woman and the dogs and you can walk away." "Not happening." Jake snarled, his eyes narrowed, the adrenaline surging through his veins. He had faced down armed suspects before, but never in such a remote, disadvantageous position. Suddenly, Max, with an incredible burst of speed and agility, broke from their defensive line. He didn't charge the men directly. Instead, he veered sharply, his powerful body a black and tan blur against the white. He circled behind them, kicking up a shower of snow, creating a diversion. Luna, quick to understand, mirrored his movement, creating a pincer effect. The two thugs, momentarily disoriented by the unexpected maneuver, spun around, their rifles swinging wildly. In that split second of confusion, Blitz seized his opportunity. With a low bark, he launched himself forward. Not at the men, but towards the deeper woods beyond them. Drawing their attention, "They're trying to get away!" one of the thugs shouted, and both men began to move, firing wildly in the direction of the dogs, their shots echoing eerily in the silent forest. "Now, Ilara, run!" Jake yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her up. He knew this was their only chance. Max, Luna, and Blitz were creating a diversion, risking their lives to buy them precious seconds. Alara, despite her pain, found a surge of strength. She scrambled to her feet, the two smaller dogs darting out from under the log and following her. Jake pushed her forward, away from the gunfire, deeper into the forest. Following a different path than the one the K9s had taken. Go. Don't look back, Jake urged, his heart aching for his loyal partner and Alara's courageous dogs. He fired 2 warning shots into the air, hoping to further disorient the thugs and draw their fire, as he ran, stumbling through the deep snow. The sounds of shouting and more gunfire echoed behind him. He risked a glance back, through the swirling white. He saw the shadowy figures of the thugs still distracted, aiming their rifles into the tree line where Blitz and the others had vanished. Jake knew he had to keep moving, to get Alara to safety. But a profound anxiety gnawed at him. Had he just sent his beloved partner and Alara's extraordinary dogs to their deaths? The thought was a bitter, icy taste in his mouth. The unseen trail, which had once been their path to discovery, had now become a terrifying gauntlet of desperate flight, with the ultimate fate of the brave K9s hanging precariously in the balance. The sounds of pursuit, muffled by the intensifying blizzard, slowly faded behind them. Jake, half carrying Alara, stumbled through the deepening snow, his lungs burning, his legs screaming with exertion. Alara was barely conscious, her body a dead weight against his. The 2 smaller dogs, whimpering, burrowed themselves into the folds of her coat, their tiny bodies trembling. Every fiber of Jake's being urged him to keep moving, but he knew Alara wouldn't last much longer in these conditions. Hypothermia was setting in rapidly. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The swirling vortex of white consumed everything, obscuring any sign of their pursuers, and, more agonizingly, any sign of Blitz, Max, or Luna. A cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. Had their heroic diversion been a death sentence, the thought was a relentless torment. We need shelter, Alara rasped, her voice barely audible, her teeth chattering so violently her jaw seemed to lock. Jake scanned the immediate surroundings. The forest here was dense, ancient pines forming a formidable barrier against the wind, but offering little in the way of warmth or substantial cover. Then, through a momentary lull in the blizzard, he saw it, a dark mass, partially obscured by a fresh drift of snow, looming beyond a thicket of gnarled, snow-laden bushes. It wasn't natural, it was too regular, too structured. He pulled Alara towards it, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. As they drew closer, the shape resolved into an old, dilapidated cabin, almost entirely swallowed by the snowdrifts. Its wooden walls, weathered and gray, sagged precariously, and what remained of its roof was blanketed in a thick, insulating layer of white. It looked abandoned, ancient, a relic from a forgotten era of logging or trapping, a cabin. Jake gasped, relief momentarily washing over him. It was far from perfect, but it was shelter, and it offered a desperate chance for Alara to warm up. As they approached the entrance, a crude, plank-boarded door half buried in snow. Jake's police instincts kicked back in. This was too convenient. A hidden cabin, just when they needed it most. He remembered Ilara's story. Volkov held her in a makeshift shelter. Could this be another one of his hidden outposts? A trap. He pushed Alara gently behind a thick tree, out of direct sight from the cabin door. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice low and firm. "Don't make a sound." The 2 small dogs whimpered but remained huddled against her. Jake drew his sidearm again, the cold metal reassuring in his hand. He approached the cabin cautiously, his senses on high alert. The wind whistled through the gaps in the timber walls, a mournful sound that did little to calm his nerves. He circled the cabin slowly, his boots crunching in the deep snow, searching for any sign of recent human activity, any fresh tracks that weren't their own. The blizzard was his ally here, its relentless fall quickly erasing footprints. but it also masked any new arrivals. He reached the front of the cabin again. The door looked ancient, rotting in places, but secured with a rusty, heavy padlock. A faint, almost imperceptible wisp of smoke curled from a crude stone chimney on the roof, partially covered in snow. A fire. Someone was inside. His heart thudded against his ribs. It could be Volkov's men, waiting, or perhaps a lone, desperate trapper, stranded by the storm. Either way, it was a gamble, but Alara was fading fast. He had to take it. He pressed his ear against the rough and timber wall, straining to hear anything over the howling wind. A low, rhythmic thump, thump, thump echoed faintly from within. Not footsteps. Something else. And then, a sound that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end a deep. Familiar whine. It was a canine whine. But not just any canine whine. It was a whine of discomfort, of unease. But also one of something else. Anticipation. He tried the door, pushing against it gently. The heavy padlock held firm. He couldn't kick it open without making a huge amount of noise and potentially alerting whoever was inside. He needed a way to observe, to assess the threat. He moved to a small, crudely cut window, barely more than a slit in the logs, covered by a tattered piece of canvas that flapped in the wind. He carefully peeled back a corner of the canvas, just enough to peer inside. The interior was dim, lit by a small, crackling fire in a stone hearth. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and a faint, coppery smell. His eyes, adjusting to the gloom, swept across the single, cluttered room. There were rough-hewn shelves lined with rusty tools, a tattered sleeping bag on a dirt floor, and a small, rickety wooden table. And then he saw them. In the center of the room, on a worn, dirty blanket, lay a large, powerful German shepherd. Its fur was matted, its ribs showing starkly, but its eyes, when they met Jake's through the narrow slit, were intelligent and alert. It was the same distinct shade of black and tan as Max and Luna. This dog, Jake realized with a jolt, was one of Alara's S.O.S. dogs, and it was chained to a heavy iron ring set into the floor. As Jake watched, the dog struggled, pulling against the chain, whimpering softly. Its head was down, almost as if in defeat. But then, as Jake watched, it slowly, painfully, lifted its paw. It tapped it once on the floor, then again, and again. Thump, thump, thump. And then, with a tremendous effort, it shifted its body, stretching its leg out, tapping 3 times on the floor. Then, with a long, drawn-out movement, it dragged its paw across the rough floor, creating a scratching sound. 3 more long drags. And finally, 3 more distinct taps. Nah, nah, nah. An S.O.S. tapped out on the floor, inside the cabin. Jake's blood ran cold. This wasn't a trap. This was another victim. Another of Alara's precious dogs, held captive. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The coppery smell, the dog's gaunt appearance, the struggle to tap the message. It meant this dog had been here longer, had perhaps endured more. It explained the different S.O.S. message. A more desperate, almost defeated version of the one in the snow. He needed to get inside, and he needed to be fast. He pulled back from the window, his mind racing. The padlock. He didn't have bolt cutters. He looked around frantically, his eyes darting through the swirling snow. Then, his gaze fell upon a large, jagged rock, half buried in the snow near the cabin's corner. It was heavy, formidable. He could use it, it would make noise. But the blizzard might just cover it. He moved quickly, grabbing the rock, its surface rough and icy against his gloves. He raised it, taking aim at the rusty padlock. 1 strike. That's all he had. If he failed, He'd alert anyone inside, if there were others, and waste precious time. He swung the rock with all his might, bringing it down squarely on the padlock. There was a sickening crack, followed by the splintering sound of wood as the ancient doorframe gave way. The padlock, twisted and broken, flew off, clattering into the snow. The door, now unsecured, swung inward with a groan, revealing the dim interior. The German shepherd inside, startled by the sudden noise, barked once. A short, sharp sound. Then its eyes, wide with hope, fixed on Jake. Jake burst through the doorway, his weapon drawn, his eyes sweeping the room, ready for a confrontation. But there was no one, just the chained canine and the flickering fire. The air, though warmer than outside, was heavy with a pervasive, unsettling stench. The coppery smell was stronger here, mixed with something else. Something metallic and sharp. He holstered his weapon and rushed to the dog. Kneeling beside it, its fur was indeed matted and dirty, and he could see several raw, angry wounds on its legs and flanks. Partially hidden by its thick coat, the dog was clearly injured, but its tail, despite the pain, gave a weak, hopeful wag. "Hey there, buddy," Jake murmured, reaching out a careful hand to stroke its head. The dog leaned into his touch, whimpering softly. "You're safe now. I'm getting you out of here." He examined the chain. It was thick, securely bolted to the floor. He didn't have the tools to remove it quickly. Panic began to rise, and he couldn't leave this dog. But he couldn't bring Alara inside yet either. Not with the risk of Volkov's men appearing at any moment. Just then, from outside, he heard a new sound, cutting through the howl of the wind. A distant but distinct engine noise, a snowmobile, or perhaps multiple snowmobiles. And they were getting closer. Fast. Jake's heart leaped into his throat. Volkov? They were here. And he was trapped. He looked at the injured dog, then at the broken door, then back at the faint glimmer of firelight. He was no longer the rescuer. He was caught. He had walked directly into the lion's den, guided by an S.O.S message, only to find himself cornered. The cabin, once a symbol of desperate hope, now felt like a death trap. The shadow of doubt, which had briefly lifted, now loomed larger than ever, threatening to consume them all. The roar of snowmobile engines grew louder, shattering the eerie silence of the blizzard. Jake's mind raced, a cold dread seizing him. He was trapped. The broken door hung open, a gaping maw inviting disaster. Alara and the smaller dogs were still outside, vulnerable. The injured German shepherd inside, chained and helpless, whimpered, its intelligent eyes wide with terror. "Stay down," Jake hissed at the dog. Even though he knew it couldn't understand his words in a literal sense, he needed to assess the situation, to buy time. He glanced around the cabin, his gaze darting from the flimsy walls to the small, dark corners. No escape route, no hiding place. He peered through the broken doorway, the swirling snow momentarily obscuring his view. Then, through a gap in the pines, he saw them. 2 snowmobiles, their headlights cutting through the whiteout, roared into the clearing. On them were 4 burly figures, heavily dressed, their faces obscured by balaclavas and ski goggles. They dismounted with practiced ease, their movements economical, menacing. Each carried a long firearm. Volkov's men. The thought solidified in Jake's mind, cold and hard. They weren't just 2 thugs this time. It was a full team. He slammed the broken door shut, the decaying wood groaning in protest. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it offered a few precious seconds. He dragged the rickety wooden table across the room, bracing it against the door. It was a futile gesture, but it gave him something to do, a way to channel the surging adrenaline. "Alara?" he yelled, his voice strained. "Get clear." "Run!" There was no response from outside, only the increasing rumble of the snowmobile engines and the ominous crunch of heavy boots in the snow. He prayed she had heard him, that she had understood the unspoken command to flee. He turned to the chained German shepherd. "I'll get you out of this. Boy, I promise," he muttered, his voice grim. He quickly scanned the tools on the shelves, desperate for anything that could cut through the thick chain. A rusty hacksaw, a hammer, a few wrenches. Nothing substantial enough. The first heavy thud against the door jolted him. Then another, and another. They were trying to break it down. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. He had to be ready. He drew his sidearm, its cold weight a familiar comfort in his shaking hand. He took up a position behind the flimsy table, aiming his weapon at the groaning door. The injured canine, sensing the imminent threat, whimpered, pulling against its chain with renewed desperation. Suddenly, a different sound. Not the sound of a snowmobile, but a familiar bark. A defiant bark, cutting through the storm. Blitz! Jake's head snapped up. It was Blitz's signature bark, a sound he knew as well as his own heartbeat. And it wasn't coming from the direction of Volkov's men. It was coming from the side of the cabin, near the small, crudely cut window where Jake had first peered inside. Then a series of frantic, desperate barks. And then the faint sound of Max and Luna joining the chorus. Their barks deeper, more resonant. They were creating a diversion. Again. They hadn't run away. They had circled back. The loud thudding on the front door paused. Jake heard muffled shouts from outside. A frustrated snarl. They're circling at... Get those dogs! This was it, his chance. The canines were buying him time. Jake sprinted to the small window, tearing away the canvas. Outside, through the swirling snow, he saw a chaotic scene. Blitz, Max, and Luna were darting around the edges of the clearing, drawing the attention of Volkov's men. The thugs, frustrated, were yelling, their rifles aimed wildly, some of them splitting off to pursue the agile dogs. It was a brilliant, terrifying strategy. He risked a quick glance back to where he'd left Alara. The snow was a swirling white wall. He couldn't see her. He could only pray she had used the diversion to flee deeper into the woods. To find refuge, he turned back to the chained K9. "Come on, buddy," he urged, his voice filled with newfound urgency. He re-examined the chain, desperately. There had to be a way. He remembered a trick from his training days, a last-ditch effort to break restraints. It was risky, might injure the dog, but it was their only option. He found a loose piece of timber from the broken doorframe, strong and splintered. He wedged it under a link of the chain, near the floor bolt. He then took the heavy hammer he had seen earlier and, with a desperate, guttural grunt, slammed it down repeatedly on the timber, trying to create leverage to force the link to snap or the bolt to pull free. Metal shrieked against wood, sparks flying in the dim light. The K9 whimpered, flinching with each jarring impact, but it didn't pull away. It seemed to understand. Outside. The shouts and barks intensified. He heard the distinct crack of a rifle shot, followed by a sharp yelp that sent a pang of ice through Jake's chest. "Blitz," he roared, his heart twisting with agony. He didn't know if it was his dog or one of Alara's. He had to focus. With a final, desperate heave, Jake slammed the hammer down one last time. There was a sickening crack. The bolt, weakened by years of rust and Jake's frenzied blows, finally ripped free from the rotten floorboards. "Yes," Jake gasped, his body trembling with effort and adrenaline. The chain was free. He quickly unclasped the broken chain from the dog's collar. The canine, trembling but free, immediately tried to stand, but its injured leg buckled. "Easy. Easy," Jake soothed, supporting the dog. He saw the full extent of its injuries now. Deep cuts, abrasions, clearly from abuse. This poor animal had been through hell. "We need to go." Jake whispered, helping the dog hobble towards the shattered door. He knew they couldn't risk going out the front where Volkov's men were distracted by the other K9s. They needed an alternate exit. He spotted a small, makeshift exit in the back of the cabin, obscured by a pile of firewood and old crates. It was a narrow opening, clearly used for deliveries or waste. He quickly cleared the debris, revealing a small, snow-choked tunnel. Leading away from the cabin, it was tight. Probably too tight for him, but the dog could get through. You first. Buddy, Jake urged, gently pushing the K9 into the narrow opening. The dog, despite its pain, squeezed through, disappearing into the white. Jake took one last look around the cabin, his mind still reeling from the impossible S.O.S messages, the intelligent K9s, and the chilling reality of Volkov's operations. The scent of fear, of cruelty, seemed to cling to the very air. He knew he had stumbled onto something far bigger than a simple abduction. This was a dark network, built on the exploitation of noble animals. He heard more shouts from outside. Closer now. They were getting through the K9 diversion. He could even hear the frantic barks of Blitz and the others. Closer. More desperate. He had to move, now. He squeezed into the narrow opening, pushing his way through the snow and branches, the rough wood scraping against his uniform. He emerged into the biting wind, gasping for air. The injured K9 was already a few feet ahead, limping but determined, sniffing the ground for a path. Just as Jake fully emerged, a figure lunged from the shadows, a burly man, his face a mask of rage, his rifle raised. Jake didn't hesitate. Years of training kicked in. He sidestepped the attack, bringing his sidearm up. The man swung the rifle like a club. Jake ducked, the barrel whistling inches from his head. He brought the butt of his pistol up, striking the man hard on the jaw. The thug grunted, stumbled, and fell backward into the snow, before Jake could react further. Another figure appeared, emerging from the swirling white. This one was larger, more menacing, and in his hand, a glint of steel, a knife. Jake backed away, pulling the injured K9 behind him, trying to create distance. The man lunged, the knife flashing. Jake fired a warning shot, aiming away from the man, but close enough to make him flinch. "Stay back!" Jake shouted, his voice hoarse. The man hesitated. Then a cruel smile spread across his obscured face. "You think a little pistol can stop us? Cop Volkov wants his property, and he takes what he wants." Just as the man prepared to lunge again, a blur of black and tan shot past Jake. It was Blitz. He had circled back, silent as a ghost in the swirling snow, with a guttural snarl. He launched himself at the man, not attacking directly, but aiming for his arm, clamping down on the knife-wielding wrist. The man roared in pain. Dropping the knife, Blitz, relentless, pulled him off balance, sending him sprawling into the snow. Max and Luna, their powerful forms appearing out of the white, immediately closed in, circling the fallen thug, their barks sharp and authoritative. Jake rushed forward, quickly disarming the dazed thug. He then looked at Blitz, his heart swelling with a mixture of immense relief and profound gratitude. "You came back, boy," he murmured, kneeling to embrace his loyal partner. Blitz licked his face, then looked at the injured K9, a silent acknowledgement of their shared purpose. The sounds of distant shouts from Volkov's remaining men echoed through the blizzard. They were regrouping, closing in. "We need to move," Jake yelled. Grabbing the injured K9's leash, he turned to Blitz. "Max and Luna, lead the way. Find Alara. Find a way out." The three powerful K9s, understanding the urgency, immediately turned, their noses to the ground, sniffing out the freshest trail through the blinding snow. They were a unified force now, a pack of heroes, their unspoken communication a testament to their extraordinary intelligence and unwavering loyalty. The snow swirled around them, obscuring their path, but Jake felt a renewed surge of hope. With these incredible canines leading the way, they just might make it. The true, harrowing reality of their situation, surrounded by enemies and battling the elements, underscored the immense courage and intelligence of the canines who had tapped that silent plea in the snow, with Blitz, Max, and Luna leading the charge. Jake and the injured German Shepherd, whom Jake now internally referred to simply as Chained Dog, plunged deeper into the swirling vortex of the blizzard. The combined strength and intelligence of the K-9s were their only hope. They moved with a terrifying efficiency, their powerful legs cutting paths through the drifts, their noses unerringly finding a route through the blinding whiteout. Behind them, the sounds of Volkov's men, their frustrated shouts and the occasional crack of a rifle, grew fainter, swallowed by the howling wind and the intensifying snow. Jake risked a quick glance back. The silhouette of the cabin, a dark blot against the white, vanished almost instantly. He pulled the limping chained dog along, offering what little support he could. The dog whimpered softly but continued to push forward. Its resilience astounding. "Where are we going?" "Boys," Jake muttered, panting, his breath misting in the frigid air. He trusted them implicitly, but the sheer vastness of the forest was daunting. Max, seemingly understanding, paused for a moment, looking back at Jake with his intelligent eyes, then nudged his head towards a barely visible, narrow deer trail. It was a path that only a K-9's superior senses could detect in such conditions. Jake followed, his mind still reeling from the events in the cabin, the multiple S.O.S. messages, the bound woman, the ruthless syndicate. It was a nightmare unfolding in the heart of the winter wilderness, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes. The K-9s suddenly slowed. They had led Jake and the chained dog to a small, secluded grotto formed by a cluster of ancient, snow-laden rock formations. It offered a momentary respite from the direct assault of the wind and snow. The air here was calmer, the silence more profound. Jake gently guided the chained dog into the most sheltered part of the grotto, checking its wounds again. They looked superficial but painful. He had nothing to treat them with, but at least the dog was out of immediate danger from the elements and Volkov's men. Then, a movement from the deeper shadows of the grotto. Alara, she emerged, a ghostly figure in the swirling white, the two smaller dogs still clinging to her. Relief, so profound it nearly buckled his knees, washed over Jake. She was safe. She had followed his earlier command to run. "Alara," Jake breathed, rushing to her side. "Officer Riley." "You made it," she gasped, her voice hoarse, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and overwhelming relief. And he's here." She pointed to the chained dog. "He's my Apollo." Apollo. So that was his name. Ilara stumbled forward, collapsing onto her knees beside Apollo, cradling his head in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "My brave boy," she sobbed, checking his injuries with gentle hands. "Oh, Apollo, what did they do to you?" Max and Luna immediately came to her side, nudging her, licking her face. A silent chorus of comfort. Blitz, meanwhile, took up a vigilant position at the entrance of the grotto, his nose twitching, listening to the fading sounds of the blizzard and any residual signs of pursuit. "We don't have much time," Jake said, his voice firm, cutting through the emotional reunion. "They'll be back. They won't give up. We need to get you out of here. And we need information. Everything you know about Volkov." Alara nodded, her face grim. He's a monster. He runs a network of illegal dogfighting rings, not just here, but across several states, even internationally. He breeds dogs for fighting, steals top bloodlines, and forces them into brutal competition. He was trying to get his hands on Max and Luna. They're from a very rare, intelligent bloodline I've cultivated for generations. My family are renowned for breeding canines that aren't just powerful, but exceptionally intelligent, capable of complex problem solving. My dogs are trained for search and rescue, for therapy work, for high level obedience, not for fighting. Her voice cracked with revulsion. Jake listened, his blood running cold. This was far worse than he had imagined. An organized crime syndicate, involved in brutal animal cruelty on a massive scale. It explained the sophistication of their movements, their elusive nature. He targeted me because of my reputation. Alara continued, her voice gaining strength, fueled by anger and resolve. He heard about Max and Luna's intelligence, how they can understand complex commands, even nonverbal cues. He wanted to breed them, to create a new line of super fighters. He thought if he broke me, I'd give him my breeding formulas, my training methods. She shivered. He took Apollo first, months ago. I didn't know where he was. He used him to lure me. He threatened to kill him if I didn't come. He made me watch what they did to other dogs, to break their spirits, to make them fight. Her voice trembled with horror. Jake felt a profound wave of nausea. This was pure evil. To prey on the love between a human and their animals. To exploit such noble creatures for barbaric entertainment. How did they find you here? Jake asked. Cutting to the practicalities. I think they tracked Apollo, Alara said. Her gaze fixed on her injured dog. He must have left some kind of scent trail. However faint, and when I made the S.O.S signing in the snow with Max and Luna, they must have seen my tracks leading from my property to this general area, then used Apollo to pinpoint my location. Wait, Jake said, a thought crystallizing in his mind. You said you made the S.O.S signing with Max and Luna? You mean you actually taught them how to tap it out? Alara nodded, a faint, weary smile touching her lips. Not directly, in that moment. Max and Luna are exceptionally perceptive. They learn through observation and context. I had been teaching them Morse code for advanced communication for rescue scenarios. Just basic signals like yes, no, help. I'd tap them out on surfaces. Have them associate the taps with the meaning. When we heard your patrol car nearby, a glimmer of hope. I was tied up, gagged, but I was desperate. I kept trying to move my head, to tap my foot, to signal to them. S.O.S. I was trying to communicate to them. Help is here. Signal help. They must have understood the urgency, the meaning of S.O.S. from our previous training. And instinctively, collectively, they acted. They ran out and tapped it into the snow. They understood that the patrol car represented hope, and they needed to communicate with it in a way humans would understand. Jake stared, completely awestruck. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Not just an animal's instinct, but a complex, learned, and then applied form of communication. In a moment of extreme duress, it was a testament to Alara's training, but more so, to the extraordinary cognitive abilities of these specific canines. And Apollo. He tapped out an S.O.S. too in that cabin, Jake murmured, looking at the injured dog. He would have, Alara said softly. Stroking Apollo's head. He's just as smart. Maybe even more so. He was likely doing it to keep himself sane, to hold on to hope. Tapping it out whenever he could. Maybe when the guards weren't around, or when he heard sounds from outside. He might have even been trying to call me before I was captured. She paused, her voice filled with a mixture of pride and anguish. He's been tortured. Jake. Not physically. Not like other fighting dogs, but mentally. They starved him. Deprived him. Showed him horrific things to try and break his spirit, to make him aggressive. To make him their fighter. The weight of Alara's story settled heavily on Jake. This wasn't just a rescue operation anymore. This was a direct strike against a monstrous criminal enterprise. Volkov needed to be stopped, not just for Alara and her dogs, but for every innocent animal he had exploited, for every life he had ruined. "We need to get to my car," Jake said, pulling out his internal GPS. Though the signal was still spotty, "It's our best bet for calling for backup, getting you medical attention, and getting these dogs somewhere safe." "How far is it?" Alara asked, shivering. "A few miles," Jake admitted, grimacing. "Through heavy snow, it'll be tough." "We can do it," Alara said, her eyes fixed on him, a newfound strength in her gaze. With them, she gestured to her canines, who stood huddled protectively around her. "They know this forest. They're trained for tracking, for endurance. They can lead us." "But Volkov's men," Jake started. "They won't be expecting us to head towards civilization." Alara reasoned. "They'll think we're still deep in the woods, trying to hide. We have the element of surprise. And my dogs, they're faster than any human in this terrain." Jake looked at Blitz, who seemed to be waiting for his cue. He then looked at Max and Luna, their powerful frames and alert expressions radiating confidence. He looked at Apollo, injured but defiant, and he looked at Alara, bruised and terrified, but resilient. He made a decision. It was risky, perhaps even reckless, but it was their best chance. They would use the K9's superior tracking skills, their knowledge of the terrain, and their incredible intelligence to navigate a path to his patrol vehicle. And then he would unleash the full force of the law on Viktor Volkov and his barbaric empire. The web of injustice, so carefully woven, was about to be unraveled by the most unexpected of heroes. A pack of loyal, intelligent canines, the grotto. A brief sanctuary from the storm and the sinister shadows of Volkov's men. Was no place to linger. Jake pulled out his tactical map, its waterproof surface a pale blue in the dim light of his headlamp. "My patrol car is here," he pointed, his finger tracing a winding path. "It's roughly 5 miles due west, but the terrain is rugged. We need to cut across the forest, avoiding the main service roads they'll be watching." Alara, her breathing still shallow, nodded. "My dogs know the shortcuts. Max and Luna. Particularly, they've spent years training in these woods, learning every animal trail, every hidden passage." She looked at the two larger German shepherds, a flicker of pride in her eyes despite their perilous situation. "They're built for endurance. Apollo, the newly rescued German shepherd," nudged Ilara's hand, a soft whine escaping his lips. His movements were still stiff, but the freedom seemed to have infused him with a new resolve. Even the two smaller, scruffier dogs, their names still unknown to Jake, seemed to sense the shift in urgency, their trembling subsiding as they pressed close to Ilara's side. "Blitz," Jake commanded, turning to his own K9 front and center. "Lead the way. Boy, find us the fastest route west, away from any recent human tracks." Blitz, his ears perked, responded with an eager whine and immediately moved to the mouth of the grotto, sniffing the air, his powerful body already coiled for movement. Max and Luna, demonstrating an astonishing synchronization, took positions flanking Blitz, their intelligent eyes scanning the path ahead, their bodies already moving with a quiet determination. It was clear these K9s were not just following, they were collaborating. An elite team uniting for a common purpose. Jake helped Alara to her feet. "Lean on me," he instructed. "We move as one unit, no stopping until we hit the road." They re-entered the blizzard, which seemed to have intensified its fury. The world dissolved into a swirling canvas of white, visibility dropping to mere inches. The wind shrieked through the trees, a deafening roar that swallowed all other sounds. Jake had never experienced a whiteout of this intensity. It was disorienting, terrifying, but he trusted the canines implicitly. The dogs moved with an almost supernatural precision. Blitz, taking the lead, darted through the snow, his nose occasionally dipping to the ground, then rising to scent the air. Max and Luna, just behind him, provided a double check. Their movements echoing Blitz's, creating a wider, more stable path for Jake and Alara. They navigated unseen obstacles, veering around hidden ravines and sunken logs, their unerring instincts guiding them through the hostile landscape. Alara, despite her exhaustion, found a surprising inner strength. She pointed occasionally, whispering directions to Jake, identifying specific rock formations or tree clusters that she recognized from her years of training in the area. Left here. That's the old Trapper's Trail. Leads to a steep incline, but a quicker path. Her knowledge of the forest, combined with the K9's primal guidance, was their lifeline. As they pushed onward, a grim determination settled over Jake. He thought of Volkov, the mastermind. The man was a ghost, a name whispered in intelligence circles, a phantom figure whose network of cruelty was vast and untouchable. But now Jake had a face, a victim and a living, breathing connection to his monstrous operations. Alara and her extraordinary dogs, he recalled the intelligence briefings about Volkov. Sparse. Fragmented reports gleaned from intercepted communications and informant whispers. Volkov was an enigma, a man with no traceable past, no public profile. He operated through layers of enforcers, cutting off any direct links to himself. His dog fighting rings were rumored to be incredibly lucrative, attracting high-stakes gamblers and desperate, violent men. The K9s he used were often stolen, or bred into submission, their spirits broken for brutal entertainment. The idea that he targeted Alara's rare, intelligent bloodlines to create a new breed of super fighters sent a shiver of revulsion down Jake's spine. "How does he operate?" Jake panted, forcing the words out through ragged breaths. "His organization. Is it local? Who are his main people?" Alara, her voice weak, began to paint a terrifying picture. He uses isolated properties, old farms, abandoned industrial sites. He moves frequently, never staying in one place for long. He has a core group of enforcers, brutal, loyal men who carry out his dirty work. The ones you saw, they're probably the lower-level enforcers. There are others, higher up. Any names? Jake pressed, knowing that even fragmented information could be vital. "Not names, I know," Alara confessed. "But there's a man. They call him the Carver. He's Volkov's second in command. He's the one who supervises the dogfights, breaks the animals. He enjoys it. He was the one who tortured Apollo. Mentally, he's the real sadist." Her voice trembled with a palpable fear and disgust. The Carver. The name conjured a chilling image, a shadow lurking behind the already monstrous figure of Volkov. Jake filed it away. Another piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just about rescuing Alara, it was about dismantling an entire criminal enterprise, as if on cue. A sudden gust of wind ripped through the trees, carrying with it a faint, familiar scent. Smoke. And something else. Something metallic. Gunpowder. The K9s in front of them stiffened. Blitz let out a low growl. Max and Luna stopped dead in their tracks, their heads raised, sniffing the air. "They're close," Alara whispered, her eyes wide with renewed fear. "They must have circled around, or they're using a different route. Parallel to ours?" Jake's heart sank. He had hoped the blizzard would be their shield, their ally. But Volkov's men, familiar with the terrain and armed with snowmobiles, were clearly relentless. "Down, everybody down," Jake commanded, pushing Alara and Apollo behind a cluster of snow-covered boulders. The two smaller dogs immediately huddled, trembling. Max, Luna, and Blitz took up defensive positions, their bodies low to the ground, their growls barely audible above the wind. He strained his eyes through the driving snow. Nothing, just the endless white. But the scent was unmistakable, and the K9's reaction was definitive. Then a faint flash of light through the trees. A headlamp, followed by another, and another. They were moving in a formation, spread out, trying to cover ground. "How many?" Jake whispered to Alara. "At least 5 or 6, she murmured, clutching her knees. Volkov usually travels with a small, elite team for anything important. 5 or 6 armed men. Against Jake. An injured woman. An injured dog. 2 terrified small dogs. And 3 K9s trained for rescue and obedience. Not direct combat. The odds were stacked overwhelmingly against them. Jake knew he couldn't engage. His pistol was no match for multiple rifles in this kind of terrain. He had to lead them away, to somehow lose them in the blizzard, to reach his patrol car. "Stay low," Jake ordered Alara. "Dogs, follow me. We need to split up for a distraction." Blitz looked at Jake, then back at Alara and the other dogs. His hesitation palpable. His loyalty was torn. "Go, boy," Jake insisted, pointing towards a particularly dense section of the forest. "Lead them away," Blitz, with a mournful whine, finally obeyed. He darted into the swirling white, a dark phantom against the snow. Max and Luna, after a moment's hesitation, followed him, their powerful bodies melting into the blizzard. Their barks, now faint and distant, quickly drew the attention of the approaching figures. "They're going that way," a gruff voice shouted. And Jake heard the distinct roar of snowmobile engines changing direction, moving towards the K9's diversion. Jake felt a profound ache in his chest. He was sending his loyal partner and Alara's magnificent dogs directly into harm's way. He could only pray their speed and intelligence would be enough to evade capture. To lead Volkov's men on a wild goose chase while he tried to get Alara and the 2 other dogs to safety. "Now," Jake whispered to Alara. "Move fast." He pulled her to her feet, supporting Apollo as best he could. They moved in the opposite direction from the K9's diversion, struggling through the deep snow, relying on sheer will and the faint hope that the blizzard would once again become their ally. Obscuring their desperate escape, the sounds of pursuit, the barks, the shouts, the engine roars grew more distant, then faded completely, swallowed by the relentless fury of the storm. But the silence that followed was not one of peace. It was heavy with apprehension, with the chilling knowledge that Volkov, the unseen mastermind, lurked in the shadows, his reach extending far into this unforgiving wilderness. The battle was far from over, and the fate of the brave K9s, who had risked everything to tap that S.O.S message, hung precariously in the balance. The blizzard, though still raging, became their reluctant accomplice. The driving snow and howling wind, once formidable obstacles, now served as a thick, obscuring veil, shrouding Jake, Alara, Apollo, and the 2 smaller dogs from Volkov's relentless pursuit. The sounds of the distant chase. Where Blitz? Max? And Luna valiantly led their pursuers astray, had faded into the vast, white emptiness. The silence was heavy, broken only by Alara's ragged breathing and the soft crunch of their boots in the deepening snow. Alara was nearing her limit. Her steps grew more faltering, her body swaying with exhaustion. Apollo, though free, limped painfully, his breath shallow. The 2 smaller dogs, shivering uncontrollably, were nearly dragging their paws. Jake knew they couldn't continue much longer without risking severe hypothermia or collapse. They needed shelter, a place to regroup and formulate a desperate plan. He scanned the immediate surroundings, his eyes piercing through the swirling white. The forest here was a dense labyrinth of ancient, snow-laden pines. Then, through a momentary break in the wind, he caught a glimpse of something unusual, a faint, almost imperceptible discoloration in the pristine white of a snowdrift. Hinting at something buried beneath, he pulled Alara towards it, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and faint hope. As they drew closer, the shape resolved into a small, overturned shed or perhaps a collapsed hunting blind, half buried under a massive snowdrift. It was barely more than a shallow dugout, covered by a few rotting planks and a tarp. But it offered a chance. However slim, in here. Jake gasped, pushing aside a snow-laden piece of canvas. The interior was cramped, dark, and frigid, but it offered a momentary respite from the direct assault of the wind and snow. He helped Alara and the dogs inside, then collapsed beside them, his own body trembling with exhaustion. The air was stale, musty, and bitterly cold. But it was still better than the relentless battering of the blizzard. He pulled the canvas flap shut, plunging them into near-total darkness. Broken only by the faint glow of his tactical watch, Alara immediately huddled with her dogs, wrapping her arms around Apollo, trying to share her meager body heat. The two smaller dogs burrowed into her lap, whimpering softly. "We can't stay here long," Jake stated, his voice raspy. "It's too cold, and Volkov's men will eventually circle back. We need a plan, a desperate one." Alara looked up, her eyes wide in the gloom. "My dogs, Blitz. Max, Luna, do you think they're all right?" Her voice was laced with raw anguish. Jake's heart ached. He didn't know. He had sent them into the jaws of a lion. "They're smart. Alara, they're fast. They know this terrain. They bought us time. That's what matters now. We have to make that time count." He forced a conviction into his voice that he wasn't entirely feeling. The uncertainty about Blitz was a gnawing pain in his gut. He pulled out his satellite phone. The screen remained stubbornly blank, no signal. The remote location, combined with the extreme blizzard, rendered it useless. They were truly alone. "All right," Jake said, forcing himself to focus. "Here's what we know. Volkov is ruthless, well organized, and he wants your dogs. He has armed men, snowmobiles. We have us, and Apollo." He looked at the injured German shepherd, then at the two trembling smaller dogs. "And the blizzard. That's our only real advantage right now. It obscures vision, muffles sound, and makes tracking difficult." "They'll use thermal imaging," Alara whispered, her voice a ghost of its former strength. "They'll have sensors. They'll find our heat signatures eventually." Jake nodded grimly. "Which means we can't stay put. We have to move, but we can't outrun them. Not with your injuries, not with Apollo. We need to buy more time. And we need to get to my patrol car. It's our only link to the outside world. Our only way to call in the cavalry." He looked at Alara, her face pale in the faint glow. "You said your dogs are exceptionally intelligent, that they learn through observation, that they can understand complex commands and nonverbal cues, that Max and Luna understood your desperation and tapped the S.O.S. This is our last shot. We need to use that intelligence against Volkov." Alara, despite her exhaustion, seemed to spark with a renewed focus. "How decoy," Jake stated, the word hanging heavy in the cold air. "A massive, undeniable decoy. Something that will draw their full attention. Something they'll chase for hours, believing it's us. While we take a different, slower, but safer path to the patrol car." "But what kind of decoy?" Alara asked, her brow furrowing. "And how do we make it? We have nothing?" Jake thought frantically, his eyes darting around the confined space. He saw a few abandoned pieces of rotting timber, remnants of the shed's original structure. He thought of the fire he'd seen in Volkov's cabin. Smoke. Heat. Thermal signatures. "Knew we built a distraction," Jake said. A desperate idea forming. "A fire. A big one. Something that will give off a massive heat signature, enough to fool their thermal sensors, enough to make them believe we've stopped to make camp. Alara's eyes widened. But we can't just leave a fire. It would burn the forest, not a real campfire. Jake clarified. A controlled burn. We use these rotten timbers. We stack them, douse them in whatever flammable material we can find, maybe some dried leaves. Pine needles. We light it. But the key is the thermal signature. It needs to mimic a group of people and dogs. He looked at the two smaller. Shivering dogs? They were terrified, but alert. And you, Alara. You said your dogs can understand complex cues. We need them to create a secondary, smaller diversion after the fire is lit, a set of paw prints leading away from the fire, but in a direction different from our actual escape route. Alara nodded slowly, her mind already working, processing the complex layers of the plan. It's audacious, but it might work. If the snow is falling heavily enough to cover our true tracks quickly, it is, Jake confirmed, looking at the canvas flap, where the snow continued to hiss relentlessly against the exterior. The blizzard is our best friend right now, but we need to move fast. They're circling. They'll find this grotto eventually. We need kindling, Alara said, her voice stronger now, the challenge invigorating her. And something to light it with. Jake rummaged through his uniform pockets. He had a small, waterproof box of matches and a fire starter kit. Standard issue for winter patrols. Got that covered. We need to collect the driest wood we can find under the snow, and we need to find the right spot for this decoy fire. It needs to be visible to them, but far enough away from our real escape route that they won't accidentally stumble upon our tracks. They began to move, quietly and quickly, within the cramped shelter, formulating the details. Alara's knowledge of the forest and animal behavior was invaluable. She identified specific areas where dry kindling might be found beneath the snow, old hollows in trees, or protected under rock overhangs. She also began to outline how she would direct Apollo and the two smaller dogs to create the misleading tracks after the fire was lit. Apollo, you'll have to be very careful, Alara murmured, stroking the injured German shepherd's head. Just a few prints, enough to show our direction, then disappear. Apollo looked at her, then at Jake, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand the gravity of the task. The plan was audacious, fraught with risk, but it was their only option. The stakes were impossibly high, not just their lives, but the fate of Max, Luna, and Blitz, who were still out there. Bravely leading Volkov's men away, they emerged from the makeshift shelter, careful not to leave any obvious tracks leading directly from it. The blizzard continued its furious dance. But they had a purpose now, a desperate mission to execute. They moved stealthily through the whiteout, searching for the ideal location for their decoy fire. Jake found a relatively open spot, sheltered enough to allow the fire to catch, but exposed enough to be seen through thermal imaging. They began to gather the driest bits of wood, twigs, and leaves they could find, their fingers growing numb with the cold as they worked. Jake thought of Volkov, the cold, calculating mastermind. He operated in the shadows, believing himself untouchable. He preyed on the innocent, on the loyal, on the vulnerable. But he had underestimated one crucial factor, the unbreakable bond between humans and their canine companions. He had underestimated the intelligence, the courage, the sheer unwavering loyalty of Alara's dogs. He had underestimated the power of an S.O.S. tapped in the snow. All right, Jake whispered, his breath clouding in the air as they finished stacking a substantial pile of wood. This is it. Ready. Alara. Alara nodded, her face grim. Ready as I'll ever be? Apollo, come here. She instructed Apollo to wait a short distance away, positioning him for his critical task. Then, she looked at the two smaller dogs, and with a series of gentle but firm hand gestures. She showed them which direction they would head after Apollo left his tracks, leading them away from the decoy. The Jake produced his fire starter. With a practiced flick, a small flame sputtered to life. He carefully nurtured it, coaxing it to grow, feeding it with dry kindling. Slowly, painstakingly, the fire began to catch, a small, defiant beacon in the raging blizzard. As it grew, its heat began to radiate outward, a powerful thermal signature destined to deceive. "Now, Apollo," Ilara whispered, giving him a specific hand signal. Apollo, despite his limp, moved with remarkable precision. He walked a short distance from the nascent fire, making 3 distinct paw prints. Then, he deliberately dragged his paw for a longer distance. Then 3 more distinct prints. Another S.O.S, but a decoy one, leading away in a different direction. He was leaving a breadcrumb trail, designed to lure Volkov's men into a wild goose chase. Once the prints were made, Ilara gently guided him and the 2 smaller dogs on their true escape route, away from the decoy. Jake watched the fire grow, its flames licking hungrily at the dry wood. It would burn for a while, giving off enough heat to register on thermal sensors. It was a beacon, a false promise, a trap. He could almost feel Volkov's men, their sensors picking up the heat. Thinking they had found their quarry, he cast one last look at the fiery deception, then turned and began to follow Ilara, her injured dogs, and the faint, almost indiscernible trail they were now making through the blinding snow. The real escape had begun. The desperate plan was in motion. The ultimate confrontation with Volkov, the mastermind, was inevitable. But now, they had a fighting chance. Thanks to the incredible intelligence and loyalty of a pack of canines, the decoy fire, a deceptive beacon of warmth, crackled and hissed behind them, its heat signature blooming across the thermal sensors of Volkov's approaching men. Jake knew it was a dangerous gamble. If the blizzard lessened, or if Volkov's crew grew too suspicious, their ruse would be exposed. But for now, it was their best, perhaps only, chance. He continued to support Ilara, whose every step was a testament to sheer willpower. Apollo, limping but determined, followed closely, while the 2 smaller dogs, their eyes wide with fear, huddled near Ilara's legs. The true escape route was slow, painstaking, a mere crawl through the deep, swirling snow, designed to leave as little visible trace as possible. Suddenly, a distant roar cut through the howl of the wind, the unmistakable sound of a snowmobile. Closer now, its engine revving, then another, and another. They were converging on the decoy fire. "They took the bait," Jake whispered. A grim satisfaction mixed with profound anxiety. The K-9s had bought them time, and the fire was buying them more. But for how long? He could almost picture it Volkov's men, confident in their technological advantage, seeing the large heat signature, believing they had finally cornered their quarry. The image of Blitz, Max, and Luna, fearlessly leading them on a wild chase, fueled Jake's resolve. He had to make their sacrifice count. As they moved deeper into the forest, the terrain grew even more challenging. Steep inclines, treacherous descents, and hidden obstacles beneath the snow made progress agonizingly slow. Ilara stumbled repeatedly, her strength draining with every arduous step. Jake worried intensely about her hypothermia, which was visibly worsening. Her lips were blue, her skin clammy, and her shivers now uncontrollable tremors. "We need to find a place to rest," Ilara gasped, her voice barely audible. "Just for a moment, I can't feel my toes." Jake knew she was right. Continuing would risk her life. He scanned the immediate surroundings. They were in a particularly dense part of the forest, where ancient trees formed a natural canopy. Offering some respite from the direct force of the blizzard, he spotted a shallow overhang of rock, barely large enough for them to huddle together. Just for a few minutes, Jake said, guiding her towards it. Then we have to keep moving. They squeezed into the cramped space. Jake quickly checked Alara's extremities, rubbing her hands and feet, trying to restore circulation. He pulled off his heavy outer patrol jacket and wrapped it around her, offering what little warmth he could. Apollo immediately curled up against her, acting as a furry hot water bottle, his presence a comforting weight. The two smaller dogs huddled against him as well, seeking warmth. "Tell me more about Volkov," Jake urged, trying to keep Alara conscious to distract her from the cold. "Anything? Habits? Weaknesses? Anything that could help us." Alara shivered violently, but her eyes, though clouded with fatigue, held a spark of defiance. "He's obsessed with control. He loves to break things, spirits, animals, people. He views loyalty as a weakness, something to be exploited. He prides himself on being untraceable. He never uses the same location twice for long. He has a network of safe houses, but they're mostly in remote, isolated areas like this." "How does he move the dogs?" Jake pressed, "And the money." "Concealed compartments in old transport trucks, modified for extreme conditions," Alara explained, her voice gaining a little more clarity. "They transport the animals and the proceeds from the fights. He never uses banks, always cash, or untraceable digital currency. He has a small, specialized team for transport, and a network of corrupt officials, I suspect, who turn a blind eye." Jake listened intently, absorbing every detail. This was invaluable intelligence. If they could just get to his patrol car, if he could just get this information to his superiors, it could be the beginning of the end for Volkov. Suddenly Apollo, who had been resting, lifted his head, his ears perked up, and a low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest. It was a warning, a different kind of growl than before, deeper, more menacing. Jake's heart leaped into his throat. He immediately pushed Alara further into the recess of the rock overhang, his hand going to his sidearm. The two smaller dogs whined, pressing themselves against Alara through the howling wind. Jake heard it. A faint but distinct sound, not a snowmobile engine, not the crunch of boots in snow. It was a peculiar, almost metallic thwack. 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 And then he saw it, through a momentary break in the swirling white, silhouetted against the dim light of the blizzard. A figure emerged, taller than the other thugs, broader, with an aura of raw, brutish power. He moved with a sinister confidence, a chilling presence. He wasn't wearing a balaclava. His face, though partially obscured by a thick, dark beard caked with ice, was visible. His eyes were cold, dead, devoid of any empathy, and in his gloved hand, he carried a long, gnarled stick, which he occasionally tapped against the snow-covered trees as he walked. Thwack, thwack, thwack. "The carver," Alara whispered, her voice barely a breath, filled with unadulterated terror. Her body went rigid against Jake's. Jake felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This was Volkov's second in command. The sadist Alara had described, the man who broke K9s, the man who had likely tortured Apollo. His appearance here, so quickly after the K9s had led the other thugs away, meant only one thing: he hadn't fallen for the diversion. He was too cunning, too focused. He had likely used his own intuition, or some advanced tracking method. To pinpoint their true trajectory, the carver stopped about 20 feet from their hiding spot. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to the subtle nuances of the storm. He didn't seem to have seen them yet. He was relying on something else. His senses. Or perhaps the slight disturbance of the snow from their passage. However faint, He began to slowly circle the rock formation, his eyes scanning, his gnarled stick tapping methodically against the trees. He was hunting them, like a predator stalking injured prey. Jake's grip on his pistol tightened. He had one advantage, the element of surprise, but it was fleeting, and he knew engaging the Carver, a man known for his brutality and skill, would be incredibly dangerous, especially with Alara and the injured dogs to protect. Apollo, despite his pain, began to pull himself up, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. His eyes were fixed on the Carver, filled with a raw, primal hatred. He recognized his tormentor. "No, Apollo! Stay down!" Jake whispered urgently. Pushing him back down, he couldn't risk Apollo engaging the Carver directly in his injured state. The Carver paused his circling. He was directly in front of their hiding spot, though the rock overhang still shielded them from direct view. He sniffed the air, then let out a low, satisfied chuckle. A chilling sound that sent shivers down Jake's spine. "Come out, little cop!" The Carver's voice was a low growl, thick and menacing. "And bring the girl and my property. This forest is vast, but I always find what I'm looking for." He took another step closer, his stick tapping against the rock face, inches from Alara's head. Jake knew he was out of time. The Carver knew they were here. He couldn't hide any longer. He had to face him. "You need to stay put." "Alara," Jake whispered. His eyes locked on the Carver's silhouette. "Under no circumstances do you move. Understand?" Alara nodded, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and grim acceptance. Jake took a deep breath, steeling himself. He emerged from the rock overhang, his pistol raised, aimed directly at the Carver. The wind immediately lashed at his face, stinging his eyes with icy snow. "Freeze, police!" Jake's voice cut through the storm. Surprisingly steady, the Carver chuckled again. A chilling, humorless sound. He slowly turned, his eyes fixed on Jake, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Well, well, the brave K9 officer. Took you long enough. Where's your little doggy friend? Did he finally abandon you?" "He's smarter than you are," Jake retorted, his jaw tight. "And he's not alone. You're outnumbered." It was a bluff, a desperate attempt to gain an edge, but he had to try. The Carver's smile widened, revealing a missing front tooth. "Oh, I think not. My boys are dealing with your little pack. They'll be joining us shortly. And then we'll have a little chat about the girl and about her special dogs." He gestured vaguely to Apollo and the two smaller dogs, still huddled under the overhang. "Volkov is very particular about his property." Jake's gaze darted to the injured Apollo, whose low growl was growing louder. More defiant, he would not allow the Carver to lay a hand on him. "You're not taking anyone," Jake stated, his voice firm. "It's over, Carver. You're surrounded. Drop your weapon and surrender." The Carver threw his head back and laughed, a loud, grating sound that seemed to mock the very storm. "Surrender to a lone cop in the middle of nowhere. You're amusing, but you're also delusional." He took another step, then another, slowly advancing on Jake, his eyes never leaving him. The gnarled stick was now held like a weapon, ready to strike. The tension was palpable, a live wire crackling in the frigid air. Jake knew this was the moment, the climax, the inevitable confrontation. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and facing a formidable, ruthless adversary. But he had something the Carver didn't, the unwavering loyalty of his K9 partner, the desperate hope of Alara, and the sheer, incredible courage of the dogs who had tapped in Amohoanidibides's. Message in the snow, the storm raged around them, a furious witness to the impending clash between good and evil. The air crackled with tension, thick with the swirling snow and the silent challenge between Jake and the Carver. The storm raged around them, a furious witness to the impending clash. The Carver advanced, his gnarled stick now raised, his cruel eyes fixed on Jake. Last chance. Cop. The carver snarled, his voice a low, gravelly growl that carried surprisingly well over the howling wind. Hand over the girl and the dogs. Don't make this harder than it has to be. That's not going to happen, Jake retorted. His voice firm despite the icy grip of fear around his heart. His pistol remained aimed steadily at the carver's chest. He knew he had to gain an advantage. However slight, he needed a distraction. Something to throw the brute off balance. Behind him, under the rock overhang. Ilara whimpered, pressing herself further into the shadows. Apollo, however, let out a deep, defiant growl, his injured leg trembling as he tried to push himself up. The two smaller dogs, terrified, remained huddled. The carver took another step, then another, closing the distance between them. He was a mountain of a man. Clearly accustomed to physical intimidation, Jake knew he couldn't rely solely on his sidearm. He needed to be ready for a close-quarters fight. You're outnumbered, cop. The carver scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. My boys will be back any minute. You really think you can take me alone? Suddenly, from the swirling white behind the carver, a flash of black and tan. Silent as a ghost, Blitz burst from the blizzard, a low, guttural snarl ripping from his throat. He wasn't aiming for a direct attack. Instead, he darted between the carver's legs, a precise, calculated move that caught the massive man completely off guard. The carver roared in surprise and pain as he lost his footing, his gnarled stick flying from his grasp as he crashed backward into the deep snow. Now! Ilara! Jake yelled, seizing the moment. Run, keep heading west, I'll catch up. He turned back to the carver, who was struggling to untangle himself from the snow. Momentarily dazed, Ilara, seizing the opportunity, scrambled to her feet, pulling Apollo and the two smaller dogs with her. Go, Max Luna! Find him, she cried, her voice raw with a desperate hope, from the direction where Blitz had emerged. Two more powerful forms materialized through the snow, Max and Luna. They didn't engage the carver directly either. Instead, with astonishing coordination, they began to circle him, their barks sharp and authoritative. Creating a whirlwind of snow and confusion, they moved with an agility that belied their size, their barks echoing through the storm. Further disorienting the carver, infuriated, tried to push himself up, cursing loudly. Get off me, you mangy beasts! He swung a heavy boot at Max, but the German shepherd easily dodged it, nipping at his ankle before darting away. Luna feinted a lunge from the other side, drawing his attention. Jake knew this was his best chance. While the carver was distracted, Jake rushed forward, aiming a swift kick at the fallen stick, sending it skidding further into the snow. Out of the brute's reach, the carver's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with murderous fury as he saw Jake disarm him. He lunged, a desperate, animalistic roar tearing from his throat. His massive hands reaching for Jake's throat, Jake sidestepped, bringing his pistol up, but before he could fire, Blitz, incredibly, launched himself forward again, this time. He clamped down hard on the carver's arm, not with the intent to bite and maim, but with a powerful, controlled grip, designed to subdue. The carver screamed in pain, his lunge disrupted. Max and Luna immediately joined in, harassing the carver from different angles, nipping at his legs, his flailing arms, preventing him from gaining any leverage. They were not attacking viciously, but executing a perfectly choreographed strategy to keep him off balance, to prevent him from focusing on Jake. It was clear these canines, despite not being trained for direct combat, were utilizing their intelligence and agility in an almost strategic manner, working as a unit. Stay down, Jake yelled, pressing his knee onto the carver's back, forcing him face down into the snow. He quickly holstered his pistol and began to search for restraints. Knowing that his standard issue cuffs would be useless on this giant of a man, The Carver bucked and struggled with immense strength, but Blitz's grip was unyielding, and Max and Luna continued their relentless, coordinated harassment. They were like a pack of wolves, expertly controlling their prey. Then a new sound, cutting through the blizzard, the faint, but growing, roar of snowmobiles. Volkov's remaining men. They were circling back. The K-9's diversion was working, but time was running out. "They're coming!" Jake shouted to himself, grunting with effort as he struggled to control the Carver. He needed to incapacitate him, to neutralize the threat before the others arrived. He found a coil of heavy-duty rope in the Carver's belt, likely used for securing captured dogs. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Jake quickly bound the Carver's hands behind his back, tightening the knots with all his might. The Carver roared, but the K-9s continued to press him down, preventing him from breaking free, just as Jake secured the last knot, binding the Carver's wrists tightly. The first snowmobile roared into the clearing. On it were two more of Volkov's armed thugs. They dismounted quickly, their rifles raised, their eyes scanning the clearing. They spotted Jake, pinning the Carver in the snow. "Drop your weapon! Cop hands up!" one of them shouted, his rifle aimed directly at Jake. Jake looked up, his heart pounding. He was once again outnumbered, vulnerable, but the Carver was secured. That was something. Before he could respond, Max and Luna, reacting with incredible speed, broke from guarding the Carver. They didn't charge the new arrivals. Instead, they darted towards the snowmobiles, their powerful jaws clamping down on the exposed fuel lines and electrical wires. With a series of sharp, deliberate bites, they severed them, then spun around, disappearing into the swirling snow. The two thugs stared in stunned disbelief as their snowmobiles sputtered, coughed, and died, smoke beginning to curl from the damaged engines. "Those damn dogs!" One of them cursed, swinging his rifle towards the vanishing K-9s. This was it. Jake knew this was his best chance. With the snowmobiles disabled, Volkov's men were now on foot, significantly slowed by the deep snow, and they were still outnumbered by the K-9s. "Blitz!" Jake yelled, pointing towards the thick tree line where Alara had fled. "Lead the way to the patrol car." Blitz, after a quick, triumphant lick to the Carver's face, darted away, a blur against the white, weaving effortlessly through the trees. "After him, get that dog!" the thugs shouted, splitting up. One running after Blitz, the other still fumbling with his disabled snowmobile. Jake, making a split-second decision, knew he couldn't leave the Carver here, especially with the remaining thugs still at large. He quickly found a thick, low-hanging branch on a nearby pine tree. With a grunt, he hauled the Carver, still bound and surprisingly heavy, towards it. He quickly used the remaining rope to secure the Carver to the sturdy branch, a human anchor in the raging storm. "You're not going anywhere." Jake gasped, wiping sweat from his brow despite the biting cold. "Justice is coming for you. Carver, and for Volkov." The Carver, his face contorted in rage, struggled violently, but the ropes held. Jake didn't waste another second. He grabbed his sidearm, securing it in his holster, and sprinted into the tree line, following the faint, disappearing trail left by Blitz. He could hear the shouts of the remaining thugs, the sounds of their frustrated pursuit of his loyal K-9. He ran, his legs burning, through the swirling white. He knew this wasn't the end. The battle with Volkov, the true mastermind, was still ahead. But he had secured a critical piece of the puzzle, the cruel enforcer, the Carver, and he had done it with the extraordinary, coordinated efforts of Blitz, Max, and Luna, the very K-9s Volkov sought to exploit. The thought of Alara, fleeing through the storm with Apollo and the smaller dogs, spurred him on. He had to get to his patrol car, to call for backup, to unleash the full force of the law on this barbaric organization. The snow continued to fall, burying their tracks. But the path to justice, forged by the bravery and unparalleled intelligence of a pack of K-9s, was now clear, the ultimate climax. The takedown of Volkov's entire operation was within reach. Jake ran, his boots churning through the deep snow, guided by the almost imperceptible trail left by Blitz. The sounds of the struggling thugs, their frustrated shouts fading behind him as they battled the disabled snowmobiles, and the cunning diversions of Max and Luna, filled him with a fierce satisfaction. The K9s were magnificent, true heroes. Turning the hunter into the hunted, his lungs burned, and his muscles screamed in protest. But the image of Ilara, terrified but resilient, and Apollo, injured but free, spurred him onward. He had to get to his patrol car. He had to call for backup. This wasn't just about a rescue anymore. It was about dismantling Volkov's entire barbaric empire after what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps only 15 minutes. The trees began to thin. Jake saw the faint, diffused glow of distant streetlights. Relief, potent and overwhelming, washed over him. He was nearing the edge of the forest, nearing the service road where he had left his patrol vehicle, and then he saw it, a familiar silhouette against the swirling white his patrol car, half buried in a fresh snowdrift. Its emergency lights a faint, pulsing blue against the blizzard. Blitz, Jake gasped, his voice raw with exhaustion and relief. "We made it, boy!" Blitz, who had been running a few paces ahead, suddenly stopped. He turned, not towards the patrol car, but back into the forest. His ears perked, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest. His posture was rigid, his gaze fixed on something Jake couldn't yet see. Jake's heart leaped into his throat. More thugs had they circled around. Then, another sound, cutting through the howl of the wind. Not the crunch of boots or the roar of a snowmobile. It was a voice, cold, commanding, laced with an almost regal menace. Well, Officer Riley, it seems you've led quite a chase." Jake spun around, his hand instinctively going for his sidearm. Stepping out of the swirling white, a dark, imposing figure emerged. He was taller than the carver, leaner, dressed in expensive, tailored winter gear that seemed to absorb the snow without a trace. His face, though partially obscured by the hood of his parka, was sharp, aristocratic, with eyes that glinted with a chilling, predatory intelligence. Viktor Volkov, the mastermind himself. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly. He held no stick, no rifle. His hands were clasped calmly behind his back, but his presence was more intimidating than any weapon. He radiated an aura of absolute control, of unyielding power, and standing silently beside him, almost like shadows, were two more figures, equally well-dressed, equally imposing. One was a woman, her face striking and cold, her eyes constantly scanning. The other was a man with a severe, almost robotic posture. Both carried suppressed firearms, their muzzles peeking from under their coats. Volkov's elite guard? Jake felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This was it. The final confrontation. He was trapped between Volkov and his armed guards, and the vast, unforgiving wilderness. He couldn't risk firing, he was hopelessly outgunned. And a firefight would put Blitz in immediate danger. "Volkov," Jake said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "It's over. Your operation is exposed. Ilara Vance is safe. The carver is apprehended." Volkov chuckled, a soft, dry sound, devoid of humor. "Is he now? My condolences to the carver. He was ambitious. As for Ms. Vance, a minor inconvenience. Her information means nothing without proof, and your proof is currently stranded in a blizzard." "Officer." His gaze drifted to the patrol car. "Or about to be, I assure you. Your little radio call will never reach anyone. One of Volkov's guards, the man with the robotic posture, subtly raised his suppressed weapon, aiming it at the patrol car's tires. Don't even think about it," Jake warned. Drawing his pistol, aiming it at Volkov. One shot, and you'll regret it. Volkov merely smiled. A chillingly confident expression. A desperate bluff. Officer, you're outnumbered. Your dog is a magnificent creature, but even he cannot stop us all. He gestured subtly to his guards. Retrieve the dog, and then we can discuss your cooperation. Blitz, sensing the imminent threat, let out a low, menacing growl, his teeth bared. He moved to Jake's side, a protective barrier. Stay back. Blitz. Jake murmured, his eyes never leaving Volkov. He couldn't risk his partner's life in a direct confrontation with armed, professional killers. Volkov's female guard began to move, circling around Jake, her movements fluid and silent. Her suppressed pistol aimed directly at Blitz. Jake knew he was in an impossible situation. He couldn't fight them all. He had to buy time, to create a diversion, anything to get Blitz to safety, and to somehow protect the crucial evidence. Volkov, Jake said, his voice tight. You're a monster, exploiting animals, forcing them into brutal fights. Do you have any idea what these canines are capable of? Sema in the snow, that was them. They were calling for help. Your cruelty has created your own downfall. Volkov's aristocratic facade momentarily cracked. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of something akin to genuine surprise, then quickly replaced by disdain. Nonsense. Animals are tools, beasts to be controlled. A few paw prints in the snow is merely a coincidence. A trick of the light? It was no trick, Jake countered, his voice rising in passion. They understood. They communicated. They've just incapacitated your men, disabled your snowmobiles. They're coming for you. Volkov, Max, and Luna, they're coming. As if on cue. A faint, distant bark echoed through the blizzard, then another. Closer. Volkov's eyes darted to the sound, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face for the first time. His guards exchanged quick, concerned glances. The idea of the K9s they had just tried to eliminate somehow circling back, still active, was clearly unsettling to them. Unbelievable, and the female guard muttered under her breath. This was his chance. Jake made a split-second decision. He looked at Blitz, whose eyes were fixed on Volkov. Their minds connected in a silent, profound understanding. Blitz, Jake whispered, his voice low and firm. Go, get help. Find Alara, get to the highway, find help. Blitz whined, his loyalty torn. He didn't want to leave Jake. Go, Jake commanded, pointing towards the highway, his voice imbued with all the authority and desperation he could muster. That's an order. Blitz hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, with a mournful bark, he turned and darted into the swirling white, a dark blur disappearing into the blizzard, heading towards the highway. Get that dog! Volkov roared, his calm facade finally cracking. He's carrying information. Do not let him reach the highway. The two armed guards immediately turned, raising their weapons, firing into the direction Blitz had vanished. The suppressed shots were muffled by the snow, but the lethal intent was clear. This was Jake's moment. With Volkov's attention and his guards distracted, he lunged, not at Volkov, but at the guard closest to him, the robotic-looking man. Jake tackled him low, knocking the rifle from his grasp as they both tumbled into the deep snow. The other guard, the woman, quickly turned her weapon on Jake, but before she could fire, Volkov, furious, screamed, No, not him, not yet. He has information, get the dog. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between Jake and the vanishing silhouette of Blitz. Her training kicked in. The dog was the priority, the potential leak of information. She sprinted into the blizzard, chasing after Blitz. Jake was left wrestling with the male guard in the snow. The man was strong, trained, but Jake had the element of surprise. He quickly got the upper hand, delivering a series of sharp, precise blows, incapacitating the thug. He grabbed the man's dropped rifle. Tossing it away into a snowdrift, he pushed himself up, panting. His eyes fixed on Volkov. The mastermind stood alone, his face contorted in a mask of fury, his aristocratic calm completely shattered. He had underestimated Jake. He had underestimated the K9s. "You fool!" Volkov hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You've ruined everything." He pulled something from an inner pocket, a small, sleek pistol. Jake didn't hesitate. He charged Volkov, his own pistol raised. He couldn't let Volkov escape. He couldn't let him continue his reign of terror. Volkov fired. The shot whizzed past Jake's ear, a cold whisper of death. Jake returned fire, aiming for Volkov's arm, not to kill, but to incapacitate. But just as Volkov was about to fire again, a new sound ripped through the blizzard, a chorus of barks. Closer this time, and unmistakably triumphant. Max and Luna, they burst into the clearing, their powerful bodies covered in snow, their eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. They hadn't gone with Blitz to the highway. They had circled back, drawn by the sounds of conflict, drawn by their loyalty to Alara's rescuer. And they weren't alone. Behind them, limping but determined, was Ilara, holding one of the small, shivering dogs in her arms, and beside her, running with surprising speed despite his earlier injury, was Apollo. They had circled back. They had heard the gunfire. They had come to Jake's aid. Volkov's eyes widened in disbelief and a flicker of genuine fear. He was no longer just dealing with a lone cop. He was facing a unified force. Max and Luna didn't hesitate. With synchronized precision, they launched themselves at Volkov, not to harm, but to subdue. Max tackled him low, sending him sprawling into the snow. Luna immediately clamped down on his gun-wielding hand, forcing him to drop the pistol. Jake rushed forward. Kicking Volkov's pistol away, he quickly pinned the mastermind in the snow, his knee on Volkov's back. He pulled out his handcuffs. "Victor Volkov," Jake said, his voice grim and resolute. "You're under arrest." Volkov struggled, cursing, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. He was beaten, cornered, exposed, and it was all thanks to the extraordinary animals he had sought to control and exploit. As Jake secured the cuffs on Volkov, the distant wail of sirens finally cut through the blizzard. Rescue, backup. They were here. Blitz had made it. He had brought help. Alara stumbled forward, collapsing beside Max and Luna, embracing her heroic dogs. Apollo, limping but proud, nudged Jake's hand, then looked at the struggling Volkov with a knowing, almost triumphant gaze. What Officer Jake Riley discovered in the heart of the Oakhaven wilderness left him profoundly stunned, a web of immense cruelty and injustice. Spun by a calculating mastermind, but it was unraveled not by human technology or conventional police work, but by the extraordinary intelligence, unwavering loyalty, and unparalleled courage of a pack of K9s who had tapped an S.O.S message in the snow. Justice, against all odds, had finally arrived. The piercing wail of sirens grew louder, tearing through the last vestiges of the blizzard. Red and blue lights flashed through the swirling snow, painting the white landscape in an urgent, ethereal glow. Jake watched, a profound weariness settling over him. As a convoy of patrol cars and an ambulance finally broke through the tree line, converging on their position, Blitz, returning from his heroic dash for help, bounded back to Jake's side, nudging his hand, a silent triumph in his eyes. He had done it. He had brought the cavalry, officers, their faces grim and determined, spilled out of the vehicles. They quickly secured the bound Volkov, who continued to rage and curse. His previous composure shattered. The disabled snowmobile and the unconscious thug Jake had subdued earlier were quickly located and secured. Another team headed towards the Carver's location. Guided by Jake's hurried instructions, the female guard who had pursued Blitz returned. Exhausted and frustrated, only to be swiftly apprehended. Volkov's entire elite team, caught off guard by the K-9's tactical brilliance and Jake's tenacity, was neutralized. Officer Riley, are you all right? Chief Miller, a stern but fair man, rushed forward, his face etched with concern. He had been Jake's superior for years and knew the K-9 officer's quiet dedication. I'm fine. Chief? Jake managed, his voice hoarse. But Ilara Vance needs immediate medical attention, hypothermia, and these dogs, they're heroes, sir. Every single one of them. He gestured towards Ilara, who was now being gently tended to by paramedics. Her dogs huddled protectively around her. Apollo, despite his limp, was wagging his tail weakly. His intelligent eyes fixed on Ilara, Chief Miller's gaze swept over the scene. From the disheveled, captured Volkov to the exhausted K-9s, and finally rested on the S.O.S. Message Jake had etched into his comms during his desperate call to report the impossible. An S.O.S. in the snow. Riley? Are you serious? Dead serious. Chief. Jake confirmed, his voice firm. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. This goes far deeper than a simple abduction. Volkov runs a national, possibly international, dogfighting and illegal breeding syndicate. Ilara Vance is a renowned K-9 breeder, and her dogs, they're extraordinary. They orchestrated this, they saved her, they led me to her, they created diversions. They even disabled Volkov's snowmobiles. Chief Miller stared, his jaw slack. He knew Jake was a man of integrity, not prone to exaggeration. The implications were staggering. Get them all to the hospital immediately, he ordered the paramedics, gesturing towards Ilara and Apollo. And make sure those other dogs are safe. This is a crime scene, a big one, as Ilara was carefully loaded into the ambulance. Max and Luna insisted on accompanying her, their large bodies pressing against the stretcher, whimpering softly until the paramedics reluctantly agreed to let them ride in the back. Apollo was also lifted in, his eyes never leaving Ilara's face, the two smaller, scruffier dogs, still trembling, were gently taken by an animal control officer and promised immediate care and warmth. Jake found himself giving a detailed account of the events to a team of stunned detectives. He recounted the initial thermal anomaly, Blitz's unsettling insistence, the impossible S.O.S. in the snow, the discovery of Ilara, her harrowing story, and the incredible coordinated efforts of the K-9s throughout the ordeal. He described how Max and Luna disabled the snowmobiles and how Blitz bravely led the other thugs away. Ensuring Volkov's capture, the detectives listened, their initial skepticism slowly giving way to awe and grim determination. The sheer audacity of Volkov's operation, combined with the almost mythical tale of the K-9's intelligence, made for a case unlike anything they had ever encountered. Hours later, as dawn began to break, painting the snow-covered forest in hues of pink and gold, Jake stood beside his patrol car, sipping hot coffee from a thermos. The blizzard had finally begun to abate, leaving behind a world transformed into a pristine, silent wonderland. Chief Miller approached him, a rare, appreciative smile on his face. Riley, he said, his voice quiet. This is going to be big. National news. We've been after Volkov for years. He was a ghost. You and your K-9s just brought him down. He looked at Blitz, who was resting at Jake's feet, occasionally nudging his hand for a scratch behind the ears. Especially Blitz, he's a hero. Jake, a true, undeniable hero. Jake knelt, burying his fingers in Blitz's thick fur. He always is, Chief. But it wasn't just him. It was Max and Luna and Apollo. Those dogs, they're special. Ilara Vance is a genius. She's trained them to levels of intelligence and communication I never thought possible. The investigation into Volkov's syndicate quickly escalated into a multi-agency effort. The intelligence Ilara provided, combined with the evidence found at the cabin and on Volkov's person, led to raids on several of his hidden properties across the region. More trafficked animals were rescued, more of his enforcers apprehended. The story of the S.O.S in the snow, initially met with skepticism, gained undeniable credibility as Ilara, recovered and articulate, told her story, supported by Jake's unwavering testimony and the astonishing capabilities of her canines. Within weeks, the story became a national phenomenon. News channels ran features on Ilara Vance and her miracle dogs. Max and Luna, with Apollo, were celebrated for their extraordinary intelligence and loyalty. The S.O.S in the snow became a symbol of animal resilience and the profound, unspoken bond between humans and their canine companions. Ilara, once a private and reclusive figure, found herself thrust into the spotlight, but she used her newfound platform for good. She established the Canine Voice Foundation, dedicated to rescuing and rehabilitating dogs from illegal fighting rings, promoting responsible canine breeding, and researching advanced canine communication. Jake and Blitz became honorary members, often appearing at events. Their story inspiring countless people. Apollo, after receiving extensive veterinary care and rehabilitation, made a full recovery. He became a testament to the resilience of the spirit, his once tortured eyes now gleaming with peace and newfound joy. He remained a devoted companion to Ilara, often demonstrating his unique communication skills to mesmerized audiences. The two smaller dogs, rescued from the cabin, were discovered to be a mix of breeds, likely discarded by Volkov's syndicate. They were named Hope and Shadow by Ilara. Reflecting their journey from darkness to light, they were nursed back to health and eventually found loving, forever homes. Months later, the Oak Haven Police Department held a special ceremony. Jake, Blitz, Ilara, Max, Luna, and Apollo stood on a raised platform, bathed in the warm glow of floodlights. Chief Miller presented Jake with a commendation for exceptional bravery and outstanding police work. But the loudest applause was reserved for the canines. Blitz received a Medal of Valor. Max and Luna were honored for their heroic actions. And Apollo, once a victim, was recognized for his unwavering spirit. Jake looked out at the cheering crowd, at the beaming face of Ilara beside him, and felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served. Volkov was behind bars, facing a lifetime sentence. His empire of cruelty dismantled. The animals he sought to exploit were now symbols of hope. He glanced down at Blitz, who nudged his hand. A quiet, knowing look in his intelligent eyes. The bond between them, already strong, had been forged anew in the crucible of the blizzard, in the impossible plea of an S.O.S, tapped in the snow. They were not just partners, they were family. And as Jake stood there, feeling the quiet strength of his loyal canine beside him, he knew their adventure was far from over. There would always be more stories, more hidden truths to uncover, more injustices to right, especially with a partner as extraordinary as Blitz. Weeks turned into months, and the harsh Oak Haven winter slowly receded, giving way to the gentle thaw of spring. The story of the canines and the S.O.S in the snow, once a local marvel, had truly captivated the world. It was a narrative that resonated deeply with people, speaking to the extraordinary intelligence of animals, the unwavering power of loyalty, and the triumph of justice over cruelty. Ilara Vance had fully recovered, her strength returning with the vibrant energy of the new season. Her K9 Voice Foundation gained significant traction, receiving donations from across the globe. She poured all her energy into it, establishing state-of-the-art rehabilitation centers for rescued fighting dogs, and funding cutting-edge research into canine cognition and communication. She even collaborated with universities, aiming to quantify and understand the remarkable abilities her dogs possessed. Max, Luna, and Apollo became the Foundation's mascots, their story told and retold in countless interviews and documentaries. Apollo, fully healed, was now the embodiment of resilience. His once tortured spirit replaced by a joyful, confident demeanor. He often demonstrated his unique communication abilities, tapping out simple messages to awestruck audiences, always under Alara's careful guidance. He never had to fight again, instead. He became an ambassador for peace and understanding between species. The two smaller dogs, Hope and Shadow, thrived in their new, loving homes, their trust in humans slowly but surely returning. They were a constant reminder of the darkness they had escaped and the brighter future that awaited countless other abused animals. As for Viktor Volkov, his reign of terror had ended definitively. The evidence Jake, Ilara, and the K9s provided led to a series of arrests across multiple states and in several other countries. His network, once a shadowy, untouchable entity, crumbled. The Carver and his other enforcers faced severe charges, ensuring that justice, delayed but not denied, was finally served. Volkov himself received multiple life sentences, vanishing into the confines of a maximum security prison, stripped of his power, his wealth, and his chilling control. The dogfighting world, shaken by the public outcry and the concerted law enforcement efforts, faced an unprecedented crackdown. Officer Jake Riley, initially uncomfortable with the media attention, found himself hailed as a hero. He received numerous commendations, promotions, and even a Medal of Valor from the state governor. He reluctantly appeared on news shows, always redirecting the praise to the true stars, his canine partner, Blitz and Alara's remarkable dogs. "They're the real heroes," Jake would often say, a quiet pride in his voice as he stroked Blitz's head. "They were the ones who sent the message. They were the ones who led the way. I just followed their lead." Despite the newfound fame, Jake's life remained largely unchanged. He was still Officer Jake Riley, a dedicated K9 handler, patrolling the quiet streets of Oakhaven. But his approach to his work had evolved. He saw the world, and especially the animals within it, with new eyes. He was more attuned, more patient, more inclined to trust the inexplicable instincts of his partner. One crisp spring afternoon, bathed in the soft sunlight filtering through the newly budding leaves, Jake and Blitz were back on patrol. The snow was long gone, replaced by vibrant green grass and the scent of damp earth and blossoming wildflowers. The air was filled with the cheerful chirping of birds. A stark contrast to the howling silence of the blizzard, they drove along the very service road where the impossible journey had begun. Jake found himself reminiscing about that night. The cold, the fear, the utter disbelief at seeing the S.O.S etched in the snow. It felt like a lifetime ago. A harrowing dream that had reshaped his reality. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Blitz, who was resting peacefully in his compartment, his ears occasionally twitching at a passing scent. Their bond, already unbreakable, had deepened into something almost spiritual. They had faced true evil together, and they had emerged victorious. Jake pulled the patrol car over near the edge of Blackwood Forest, the same spot where Blitz had first shown his unsettling urgency that fateful night. He turned off the engine, and the world fell into a serene quiet, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant murmur of the creek. He opened Blitz's compartment, and the German Shepherd bounded out. Stretching luxuriously in the sunlight, Blitz walked a few paces into the woods, sniffing at a patch of spring flowers, then looked back at Jake, his intelligent eyes gleaming. Jake joined him, stepping onto the soft, mossy earth. He knelt, burying his hand in Blitz's fur, feeling the powerful, steady beat of his heart. "You know, boy," Jake murmured, his voice soft. They called it a miracle. What you and Max and Luna did, and Apollo, and they were right. It was a miracle. Blitz whined softly, nudging Jake's hand with his wet nose, then licked his face. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated affection and understanding. The world is a little brighter now, because of you. Jake continued, a lump forming in his throat. Because you understood. Because you sent that message. You taught us all something important. Buddy, about courage, about loyalty, about the hidden depths of compassion in creatures we sometimes underestimate. Blitz looked deep into Jake's eyes. A profound connection passing between them. A silent conversation that transcended words. It was a bond built on trust, on shared sacrifice, and on the undeniable knowledge that they had both witnessed and participated in something truly extraordinary. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, golden shadows through the trees, Jake and Blitz stood together, guardians of peace in a world made safer by their courage. The K9s had tapped an S.O.S message in the snow, and in doing so, they had not only saved a life, but they had changed the world, one heart at a time, proving that the most profound messages can often come from the most unexpected sources. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more incredible tales of courage, justice, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Stay with us for the next one, and while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below.